Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Kaytlin Root. Sometimes, criminals who look for victims just for fun or out of a desire to kill. In the state of Missouri, USA, there is a town called St. Joseph. This is a small town with many parks, museums, and other attractions, as well as a large number of running tracks and walking paths in one of the parks called Krug. On Sunday, October 16, 2016, a man went out jogging. Closer to the end of the trail, the man noticed something suspicious on the path. Initially, he thought it was a mannequin because Halloween is coming soon. So, he calmly continued to run past it. When he reached the object, however, he noticed blood on it. At first, he simply ran past, but something alerted him and made him turn back. The mannequin suspiciously resembled the body of a girl. There was a hole in her chest. She was lying on the asphalt without clothes, in a pool of blood. The frightened witness called 911 for help. Even when he contacted the dispatcher, he was not sure whether it was a mannequin or not. This story unfolded in mid-October, 2 weeks before Halloween, when one could encounter various oddities. Perhaps it was a Halloween prank or some kind of decoration for the holiday. When the police arrived at the scene to investigate, they confirmed the witness's worst fears. It was indeed the body of a girl. The criminal did not even bother to hide the traces of his crime. Just a meter away, clothes were found, which had been neatly cut off. Additionally, the girl's false nails were scattered around the body, indicating that she had desperately resisted and that her nails had been damaged in the struggle. During their examination, forensic scientists were unable to find any identification documents for the girl. She had no personal belongings, means of communication, or the weapon used in the crime. To make initial conclusions, it was crucial to determine who the victim of this brutal massacre was. The only clue that could help the police was a T-shirt she wore. It had an inscription indicating that she was a student at Central High School, graduating in 2017. It was assumed she was a high school student preparing to receive her diploma the following year. The fingerprints of the victim were collected, but no matches were found in the national database. This was not surprising. Given the approximate age of the victim, it was unlikely she had a criminal record. The authorities were forced to close the park to visitors for the next 24 hours to continue inspecting the area. A larger-scale operation was launched, involving many more law enforcement officers, and results came quickly. They were able to find broken parts of a mobile phone, which had been disassembled and scattered around the area. Over the next few days, the communication device was collected and completely restored. Meanwhile, the forensic expert performed an autopsy on the body, revealing that the girl had been brutally tortured before her death. Her throat had been cut twice, but that was not the cause of her death. She had received several stab wounds from an object similar to a knife, one of which had pierced her liver and caused fatal bleeding. Without emergency assistance, a cut throat could also have killed her. There were signs of prolonged strangulation on her face, which complicated the determination of exactly what had occurred. According to the forensic expert, the strangulation may have involved something like a long piece of fabric. Simultaneously, several officers visited the school indicated on the girl's T-shirt to identify any missing high school girls. At the school, the police talked to the principal and teachers, showed them photographs of the unidentified victim. The girl was recognized. Her name was Kaytlin Root. She had studied there for some time before switching to homeschool. Kaytlin was born on November 11, 1998, into a large family with 5 sisters and 5 brothers. She was very positive, artistic, and funny, and loved singing, dancing, walking in the fresh air. Her last hobby was hunting for Pokemon in the park, which was very popular at the time. It was unclear what attracted her to Krug Park, located in another area of the city that was less known to her. It was beautiful and quiet, a favorite place for many runners until this tragedy occurred. However, there were some remote and gloomy spots where locals rarely ventured. That is where Kaytlin's body was discovered. At school, Kaytlin's close friends were devastated by her loss, and they willingly cooperated with the investigation. When the Root family was informed that the body of their missing daughter had been found, everyone was heartbroken. They desperately wanted to find who had so cruelly taken the life of a girl just 3 weeks shy of her 18th birthday. Despite her close relationship with the family, at the time of the incident, Kaytlin did not live with them. She had grown up and wanted more independence, freedom, so she was temporarily staying with her best friend, who lived with her grandmother. The whole group had to maintain constant contact, but nothing suspicious was noticed. The police visited this house to speak with all its residents. In fact, the family with whom Kaytlin was living at the time noticed her disappearance and contacted the police. Upon identification, the police talked to Kaytlin's friend's family and finally received the first valuable clue. According to Kaytlin's friend's mother, a few days before the crime, Kaytlin had an online argument with her boyfriend. She was planning to break up with him, but the situation escalated into a big fight. The woman reported that their last meeting ended in a confrontation, after which Kaytlin was left with a bruise. This mark was also found during the autopsy. All this gave the police their first suspect, whom they decided to interview. They were not able to find him right away, but several of Kaytlin's boyfriend's friends responded. None of them believed that Kaytlin's boyfriend could physically harm Kaytlin, as he was not prone to aggression or violence. No one had noticed anything like that about him before. However, the police wanted to speak with him in person. Witnesses were also found who reported seeing his car, which allegedly stopped near Krug Park late in the evening. All this strengthened the suspicion against him. Finally, the police met with Kaytlin's boyfriend. The evidence of his involvement began to mount, as there were numerous marks on his body and arms, minor wounds resembling scratches. He attributed these to branches while riding a motorcycle. He stated that he met with Kaytlin, and the last time they saw each other was on Thursday, a few days before the murder. On that day, a friend of his also joined them. Everything seemed fine, and according to him, Kaytlin spent a lot of time with them, with no conflicts occurring. Therefore, he found it very unpleasant to receive a call 2 days after this meeting from an unknown person who accused him of beating women. This voice sounded threatening and offered to meet to confront him about what he had done to Kaytlin. The caller then hung up. Kaytlin's boyfriend didn't understand that there was a deeper implication behind this. Despite there being no conflicts between them, he was surprised when Kaytlin later accused him of breaking her nose. After that, she hung up and ignored his calls. He considered any accusations of aggression and cruelty, especially towards his girlfriend, to be absurd. Afterward, Kaytlin's boyfriend published several posts on his social media, suggesting that Kaytlin had convinced her friends to turn against him. He couldn't understand the reasons behind it but felt he didn't have time to figure out the details. Notably, he provided an alibi for almost the entire Saturday and Sunday, having visited several friends, all of which were confirmed, leaving no time window sufficient for an attack. Despite the suspicion, nothing significant could be obtained against him, except for the name of another potential suspect. Kaytlin's boyfriend told the detectives about Adam, who, according to Kaytlin, had been literally obsessed with her. He behaved anxiously to such an extent that he began to stalk her, sending letters with ambiguous content and insinuating that he might take his own life if she didn't want to meet him. Before the crime, the police learned that Adam communicated with his best friend on social media on October 15th at around 8 p.m., which was the last time he contacted her. To the surprise of the police, this best friend turned out to be Kaytlin. Adam had added her to his list of close friends, probably to avoid drawing attention to his unhealthy attraction to her. Before meeting with this new suspect, the detectives decided to gather more information about him and interviewed his closest acquaintances. They discovered that both Kaytlin and Adam attended a party on the night of the murder and were supposed to spend time together. At the gathering, Adam was accompanied by a couple of friends, and there were witnesses who saw the whole group leave late in the evening, with Kaytlin among them. Several attendees were confident that they all planned to go to Krug Park, where Kaytlin's body was later found. It is noteworthy that they returned without Kaytlin and told everyone that she had left with an unknown group of people, which seemed strange, uncharacteristic of her. Upon checking Adam's social media profiles, it turned out that the day after the murder, he began posting peculiar messages. While he did not specifically mention what he had done, he clearly expressed regret for some action. However, when interrogated, he He insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime and that the post referred to something entirely different. Instead, he recounted his version of events. According to Adam, when they left the party, Kaytlin received a message from a friend named Amanda. After exchanging several short messages, they agreed to meet at Krug Park. Adam stated that he had warned Kaytlin that it was a bad idea to meet anyone at such a late hour, especially in a park he barely knew, but she didn't heed his advice and left. Adam claimed that he was just friends with Kaytlin, had no conflicts with her, countering the allegations of stalking and obsession, which he also considered absurd. He showed the detectives the correspondence, where they found nothing incriminating. By Adam's own admission, the allegations of obsession with Kaytlin were clearly fabricated. He explained that the last time he saw her was not far from the place where they had spent time with friends, and she got into an SUV, which she was probably picked up in by Amanda. Adam himself saw this car for the first time, did not know who it belonged to, he couldn't recognize it, nor could the other participants at the meeting. He insisted that he believed Amanda was involved in what happened to Kaytlin. Interestingly, his account was immediately confirmed by several witnesses among the young people who were at that meeting. They also saw how Kaytlin got into an unknown Santa Fe SUV while Adam stayed with them. Adam appeared extremely upset and even went to the family of the deceased to express his condolences. Everyone believed that he sincerely mourned this loss and willingly helped the Root family cope with their grief, even assisting Kaytlin's family during the funeral. Further investigation confirmed that she had indeed communicated with a girl named Amanda. When detectives spoke to the father of Kaytlin, David Stevens, it turned out that David was well acquainted with all of his daughter's close friends. There weren't many of them, and Amanda was among them. According to him, their relationship was complicated. The teenagers were sometimes best friends and at other times fought and literally hated each other. It emerged that this girl was known to both Kaytlin's best friend and her mother, both of whom considered Amanda a very unpleasant character who left mixed impressions. Consequently, the police became interested in Amanda and decided to meet with her. She was detained and ended up under interrogation. Amanda did not immediately disclose all the information they knew about the case. She even reported that Kaytlin had disappeared rather than died. From the very beginning, Amanda acted as if she did not understand what was happening. According to her, she did not call Kaytlin on that fateful evening, had not seen her. Amanda countering what Adam and his friends claimed. Their last conversation, she said, took place on Saturday afternoon. She even provided the police with her social media account so that investigators could verify her statements. She used the pseudonym Amanda Panda without any photos. Amanda continued to deny that she had communicated with or met her friend on Sunday and provided an alibi, stating that her neighbor could confirm she had spent the entire evening at home. The police checked this information, and the woman confirmed the alibi, reporting that she had repeatedly seen Amanda in the house throughout the evening, including at the approximate time of the attack. They had crossed paths and communicated several times, which ruled out her involvement in the crime. Amanda had no plans to go out anywhere and had been at home all evening in her loungewear. After this confirmation, the police were forced to let Amanda go. All possible leads were investigated, but they remained empty-handed. The investigation reached a dead end. Due to the many participants involved, the story became so confusing that it spiraled out of control. Then, the police accessed Kaytlin's mobile phone in search of clues, allowing detectives to navigate the gallery and find a photo that was the last one taken before the brutal attack. There were no people in the image, but it included the facade of a store found in the city, about 5 kilometers from Kaytlin's house. After obtaining access to the recordings from the store's CCTV cameras, they managed to find a car that matched the description of the SUV associated with the team. When this photo was taken near the store, a dark car pulled up, from which a limping man emerged. He bought snacks and immediately left. Unfortunately, this did not yield any clues, as the store employees did not remember anyone, and the image was too blurry. The police continued to study the mobile phone of Kaytlin regarding the account named Amanda Dow. Correspondence from this page revealed that she had communicated with Kaytlin on the evening of her murder. Between them, there was a short dialogue where the girls agreed to meet and smoke a joint. As it turned out, this account belonged to a girl named Amanda Bennett, The same Amanda who was now under scrutiny by the authorities and likely had several accounts on social media. She was a 17-year-old girl who, at the time, was in a serious relationship with her 18-year-old boyfriend, Sebastian Dowell. The police went to the address where Amanda and Sebastian lived. They immediately found a dark Santa Fe SUV that matched the description of the one captured on CCTV at the convenience store where Kaytlin had filmed just before her death. There were enough clues to consider Amanda and Sebastian prime suspects. They were arrested, and while they provided an alibi, it took some time to verify it. It was decided to arrest them and also confiscate their vehicles, mobile phones for examination. Detectives questioned them separately. When they spoke to Amanda, they didn't disclose what they knew. They simply decided to restore the chronology of events starting from Friday, which was a clever move. In fact, the police were particularly interested in Saturday and Sunday. If Amanda remembered Friday well but suddenly could not recall anything from Sunday, it would appear suspicious. The police often use this technique during interrogations to break down criminals. Amanda detailed her Friday evening spent with her boyfriend and their 2-month-old child. Difficulties arose, however, when she was asked about Saturday. Suddenly, she claimed that she had actually confused the days, and the events she described occurred on Saturday. Meanwhile, Sebastian also struggled. He could not recall what he had been doing with his common-law wife in the past few days. His statements increasingly contradicted the story he had provided. Everything suggested that Amanda had prepared for her meeting with the police, but she became a little confused. Her boyfriend didn't have much time either. He couldn't even say anything about the movie they supposedly watched together at the cinema, despite Amanda describing it in detail. But they was never found on the CCTV footage. There were no tickets or any data confirming that they had been in the area over that weekend. Amanda's story remained uncorroborated. This suspicious couple was clearly lying to the police. When Sebastian was confronted with the obvious inconsistencies in their stories, he became nervous. After that, the police noticed there were some cuts on his hands. Sebastian said they were from a cat, however, he later changed his story and admitted that they might be from his knives. His collection contained numerous stabbing and cutting items. During the arrest and searches, several knives from Sebastian's collection were confiscated in hopes of finding blood on them. Later, the examination confirmed that there were particles of Kaytlin's blood on one knife. During the conversation, it became evident that Sebastian was in a subordinate position in the relationship, which he confirmed by stating that Amanda controlled everything happening 100% and that he obeyed her. According to him, Amanda completely excluded strangers from their social circle. He didn't even have friends that he could choose on his own. In fact, his social interactions were restricted because Sebastian complained that he had to ask for permission for any of his desires. For example, he liked to smoke a joint, but he would only do so after getting Amanda's approval. She was jealous and rude. In fits of anger, she often beat Sebastian quite cruelly. Once, she even broke his ribs. Sebastian feared that Amanda would eventually kill him with a knife. Sebastian said that Amanda suffered from some mental disorders that would suddenly thrust her into this aggressive state shortly before the crime. They had gone to a psychotherapist, but all the doctor did was double the dosage of her medications. However, Sebastian was not entirely innocent either. His social media profile contained a lot of dark humor, as well as cruel and murderous imagery. It seemed he was obsessed with this topic. Despite the detectives not revealing the real reason for Amanda and Sebastian's arrest, it turned out that Sebastian was aware of the murder in the park. He insisted that he had heard about it on social media, but he had already been caught in a lie. The more nervous he became, the more his story changed. In the end, he admitted that he knew Kaytlin quite well. They communicated frequently. He and Kaytlin were good friends. Kaytlin even visited them in the hospital to congratulate them on the birth of their child, during which she spoke warmly about him, touching Amanda, the new mother. From that moment on, indirect evidence began to surface, suggesting that the tragedy was provoked by Amanda's jealousy and erratic behavior. At first, Sebastian denied such assumptions, but later he confessed that Amanda had often expressed anger towards him when he exchanged compliments with Kaytlin. He continued to deny any romantic connection between them, insisting that it was purely friendly communication, while also maintaining that he was not involved in any crime. One of their friends mentioned that Amanda had always been friendly, sociable, and positive. However, the situation changed dramatically after the birth of their child, which many attributed to postpartum depression. In addition, she believed that something more than just friendship had developed between Sebastian and Kaytlin. Amanda frequently referred to Kaytlin and was clearly angry, exhibiting intense jealousy towards her boyfriend. Judging by her friend's words, this turned into an obsession with getting rid of Kaytlin. Moreover, Amanda was aware of many details about the crime that she could not have known by chance, as they had not been covered in the media. This discussion smoothly led to topics about their relationships and the birth of the child. Amanda's demeanor visibly changed when they began discussing Kaytlin and Sebastian. This was clearly a sensitive subject for her, but she composed herself and did not reveal her emotions. It is curious that during the entire interrogation, Amanda did not show any regret or pity toward her friend. On the contrary, from the very beginning, she appeared in high spirits and giggled frequently. Considering the circumstances that had led Amanda to this situation, her behavior seemed unsettling. The true motive behind this case included records of demonic summonings. This confirmed that he was involved in all sorts of dark themes with his girlfriend, but he claimed that it was all part of a hobby and role, playing games, insisting that they did not take it too far or commit any crimes. However, there was confirmation that they planned the murder in stages. Even though the information was deleted, it was easily recoverable. This became the main incriminating evidence against both criminals. When both were informed about this evidence, they abruptly changed their tactics, refuting their earlier statements and beginning to blame each other. Judging by their correspondence and records found in the house, both criminals were charged with first-degree murder. Upon reviewing their dialogues, the frightening truth of this brutal massacre was revealed. The murder was indeed ritualistic. That evening, Amanda and Sebastian sent a message to 6 contacts from their list to lure one of the victims into a trap. They probably did not care who responded, but only Kaytlin Root did, which ultimately sealed her fate. The jury was shocked by the senselessness of this act of violence, simultaneously remained confident that it was Amanda who initiated it and took the life of Kaytlin with pleasure. Her fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, and Sebastian likely helped by holding Kaytlin. On May 5, 2017, Sebastian Dowell was sentenced to life in prison for second-degree murder in the death of Kaytlin Root. Just days later, on May 9, 2017, Amanda Bennett was sentenced to life in prison for the same crime, second-degree murder. Both are without the possibility of parole. Kaytlin's family, while satisfied with the sentence, expressed deep sorrow over the loss of their daughter. The drive to achieve one's goals at any cost can lead people to commit shocking acts and betrayals. It can be hard to grasp the length someone will go to achieve their dreams, especially when it endangers the lives of others. Today's story is about a tragic murder that shocked all of Brazil. The impact was felt most deeply in the small town of São João Batista. For this close-knit community, the crime is one of the most brutal and unprecedented events in history. Flavia Godinho Mafra was born on April 19, 1996, in São João Batista, a peaceful town in the southern Brazilian state of Santa Catarina, grew up in Kaytlin. As the youngest child in a large, loving family, her parents worked hard to support their children. Flavia was kind, friendly, and outgoing. She excelled in her studies and had a passion for music, always surrounded by friends. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a teacher and had no plans to leave her hometown. After attending a local teacher training college, she graduated and began teaching at the elementary school she had once attended. At 20, Flavia met Valdeli Mafra. They quickly fell in love and started dating. In the summer of 2019, Valdeli proposed, and Flavia happily accepted. They got married that October, and just 2 months later, they received wonderful news: they were going to have a baby. Their joy was beyond words. In another development, Rosalba Maria Grime was born in 1994 in Kaytlin, a town in Santa Catarina. There is little information available about her early life or family background. From a young age, she was seen as unusual. People often felt she exaggerated stories, fabricated achievements, and sought to appear more important, making it hard for them to take her seriously. As she grew older, Rosalba increasingly craved attention by playing on others' sympathy. She would create tales of personal struggles and serious health issues she claimed to be facing. In one troubling incident, she tried to prevent a boyfriend from leaving by telling him she had a terminal illness, begging for his companionship during what she described as her final months. When her deception continued for a long time, she suddenly claimed to have made a miraculous recovery. In 2017, Rosalba married Zolmir Schiestel, a quiet, shy man who was easygoing and agreeable. Rosalba had taken the initiative to propose the marriage, and Zolmir simply nodded in agreement. They moved into a small home in a peaceful residential area on the outskirts of town. Rosalba worked as a librarian at a local school. However, her co-workers had mixed feelings about her, primarily because of her dominant demeanor and reputation for being dishonest. For the first 3 years of their marriage, Rosalba struggled to conceive, with doctors suggesting that she might never be able to have children. Therefore, when she discovered in the fall of 2019 that she was pregnant, she was filled with joy. She quickly shared the exciting news with her family, friends, and co-workers. Overcome with happiness, Rosalba even posted a picture of her positive pregnancy test on social media, announcing it to everyone she knew. In the weeks that followed, she was inundated with congratulations for her and the baby. Her husband and family treated her like a queen, shielding her from stress, taking care of everything for her. Even co-workers who had not been particularly friendly with her before began to show kindness, recognizing how long she had hoped to be a mother. In December of that year, Rosalba faced a heartbreaking event. She suffered a miscarriage in her 3rd month of pregnancy, leaving her deeply shocked and silent about her loss. Instead of sharing her pain, she chose to act as if she were still pregnant. She seemed determined to maintain the facade, perhaps knowing she might not have another chance to conceive. To support her ruse, she started wearing loose clothing and eating more to create the appearance of being pregnant. Meanwhile, a troubling plan began to emerge in her mind. About 2 months after she lost the baby, news spread at the school about the pregnancy of a young teacher named Flavia, who received many congratulations. Until that point, Rosalba and Flavia were not close. They had rarely interacted. However, Rosalba shared several fabricated stories in order to gain sympathy. She added Flavia on social media and began messaging her every day, suggesting they go for walks or chat since their due dates were similar. Rosalba asserted that they would have much in common. Flavia was initially hesitant to have lunch with Rosalba because of her eccentric reputation, but she eventually agreed during a work break. They exchanged phone numbers, and Rosalba shared several fabricated stories to gain sympathy. The only true part of her stories was that she had struggled for years to conceive and had longed for this pregnancy. Of course, she did not mention the miscarriage. Initially, they met infrequently, despite seeing each other at work almost every day. It later emerged that Rosalba had also connected with 2 other expectant mothers from the same town on social media, who she believed were at a similar stage in their pregnancies. She attempted to build friendships with them by inviting them out and asking to visit their homes. Rosalba claimed she was having a daughter. However, when she discovered that both women she had met online were having boys, she abruptly cut off contact with them. Shortly after, she found out that Flavia was expecting a girl, and from that point on, Rosalba became completely fixated on her. As time went on, it became harder for Rosalba to keep up the pretense of being pregnant. She frequently searched online for symptoms and experiences that expectant mothers often report. She would share these with her husband, family, and co-workers as if they were her own. Over several months, she gained nearly 30 pounds, but her appearance still didn't fully resemble that of someone in the later stages of pregnancy. Her husband insisted on joining her for doctor's appointments. He wanted to see the baby on the ultrasound, but Rosalba had to come up with excuses to maintain the deception. Zolmir was a trusting man who loved his wife and believed everything she said, which made it easier for her to keep him unaware of the truth. She would tell him that appointments had been canceled or rescheduled due to the clinic being overbooked or the doctor being unavailable. At times, she claimed she was lucky enough to get a last-minute appointment while he was at work, and he believed her every time. To strengthen her story, Rosalba began creating fake notes on her phone that appeared to be from her doctor, including recommendations, appointment confirmations, and cancellations. Although she didn't have a strong grasp of medical terminology, often made spelling and factual errors, Zomir wasn't familiar with medical details, so he had no reason to question her. To maintain the deception and avoid raising suspicion, Rosalba even sent messages to her husband pretending to be the doctor. In one message, she suggested that they temporarily pause their intimate relationship to minimize any risks to the pregnancy. He accepted this advice, believing it was from a medical expert. Rosalba developed an obsession with shopping for baby items such as onesies, diapers, bottles, pacifiers, blankets, and toys. She frequently visited stores with her husband, mother, or sister, but eventually, all her attention turned to Flavia. In July 2020, Rosalba organized an emotional maternity photo shoot. In the photos, she wore a flowing pregnancy gown and held tiny baby booties and a onesie while her husband lovingly embraced and kissed her belly, while she smiled sweetly for the camera. Everything appeared so genuine that no one suspected anything amiss. Those photos would later become part of the criminal case files. By early June 2020, Flavia and Rosalba were almost inseparable, spending time together every day, sharing thoughts, and planning for the future. However, it was always Rosalba who took the initiative. Flavia, being kind and empathetic, found it hard to say no. Whenever she tried to reschedule, Rosalba would play on Flavia's sympathy, claiming she was going through personal issues, needed someone to talk to, which worked every time. Rosalba was closely watching Flavia, asking her about her symptoms, doctor visits, and medical tests. She would then share those details with her own family and husband as if they were her own experiences. Rosalba imitated Flavia's walk, mannerisms, food cravings, and even how she held her back or moved awkwardly. Valdelli disapproved of his wife's new friendship and was upset about the time they spent together, which created tension in their marriage. They argued about it several times, but Flavia, being gentle and compassionate, couldn't bring herself to reject or ignore Rosalba. By mid-July, Rosalba had told people that she was due to deliver her baby, but she concocted another lie, claiming that the doctors had incorrectly calculated her due date. Meanwhile, she was secretly planning something disturbing, a scenario so dreadful. In August, Rosalba started planning a surprise celebration for Flavia to honor Flavia's upcoming baby. She chose decorations, invited guests, and set up a special photo area. Flavia, wanting to be polite, initially tried to decline the party. However, Rosalba became emotional, claiming she had put in a lot of effort and truly wanted to give Flavia a meaningful experience. Eventually, Flavia reluctantly agreed, unaware of the twists ahead. The celebration was scheduled for August 27, 2020. Rosalba managed all the details, promised to send the location and final arrangements to the guests. However, the day before the event, Rosalba contacted each guest and claimed the celebration had to be postponed due to unexpected issues. She assured them she would provide a new date and time soon. Her explanation was convincing, and no one questioned it, nor did anyone reach out to Flavia, who remained completely in the dark. On August 27th, at the originally planned time, Rosalba picked up Flavia, telling her they were going to the baby shower. Because it was meant to be a women-only event, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, stayed home. He walked his heavily pregnant wife to Rosalba's car, completely unaware this would be the last time he saw her. As they drove, Flavia was oblivious to their destination. Rosalba said it was a surprise, and a few minutes into the drive, she suggested Flavia wear a blindfold to keep it a secret. Flavia hesitated but eventually agreed, not sensing any danger. During the drive, Rosalba kept the conversation light to help Flavia feel relaxed and avoid raising any suspicions. They went to an abandoned ceramics warehouse in Canaliña's Galera neighborhood. After helping Flavia out of the car while she was still blindfolded, Rosalba guided her into one of the old buildings. The silence and strange smell likely made Flavia uneasy. When she reached up to take off the blindfold, Rosalba suddenly struck her head with a heavy brick. Rosalba hit she multiple times until she collapsed on the floor. In a final act of violence, Rosalba punched her in the face. It seemed Rosalba had wanted to hurt her as much as possible, despite once calling her a friend. Without checking if Flavia was still alive, Rosalba hurried to carry out the next phase of her horrific plan. She had brought a box cutter, some rags, and a blanket to the scene. With a steady hand, she began to cut into her friend, Flavia. Rosalba had no medical training, no understanding of anatomy, and no idea how a C-section was performed. Despite this, she started slicing into Flavia's abdomen with the box cutter, trying to retrieve the baby. She acted aggressively, using too much force and lacking precision. The box cutter, unlike a surgical instrument, tore through the skin rather than creating clean cuts. Rosalba had completely misunderstood the reality of what she was attempting. What she thought would be a quick procedure turned out to be chaotic and messy. The process took much longer than she expected, and her frustration grew, resulting in her accidentally cutting the baby several times while trying to pull her out. The environment was entirely unsanitary. Rosalba didn't even attempt to clean the tools she had brought. The fact that the baby survived the ordeal was nearly miraculous. After finally extracting the baby, she wrapped the newborn in the blanket and placed her in the back seat of her car. Rosalba then wiped her hands as best as she could, changed into clean clothes she had brought from home, and threw her blood-stained outfit into the trunk. She paused to rehearse her story before heading to the hospital. In her haste, Rosalba forgot to properly close the trunk of her car, and while waiting at a red light, it popped open enough to expose the bloodied clothing inside. Passengers in the car behind her noticed this and immediately called the police, providing a description of the vehicle and the direction it was heading. Minutes after Rosalba arrived at the hospital, officers intercepted her at the entrance as she carried a blood-soaked bundle in her arms. She told them it was her baby and that the newborn needed urgent medical attention. Officers escorted her to the emergency room while they waited nearby. With a trembling voice and tears in her eyes, Rosalba explained to the medical staff that she had gone into sudden labor and didn't have time to reach the hospital in advance. She said the baby had fallen onto gravel during her rush trip to the car, and in a panic, she had wrapped the baby in the first blanket she found before driving. When a doctor informed her that she needed to be examined, Rosalba refused, insisting she was fine. This raised immediate concerns among the staff. Upon examining the baby, the medical team found several unusual cuts and puncture wounds that did not appear to be from a fall on gravel. The injuries looked like they had been inflicted with a sharp object in a chaotic manner. Fortunately, none of the wounds affected vital organs, and the medical team quickly treated them to prevent infection. Concerns were immediately communicated to the police, who insisted that Rosalba undergo a physical examination. They warned her that if she refused, they would have to use legal authority. With no other option, Rosalba reluctantly agreed. The examination confirmed the doctor's suspicions. There were no signs of childbirth or pregnancy. There was no bleeding, no physical trauma, and no other indicators. Both internally and externally, everything looked normal, indicating that her entire account was fabricated. However, the doctors chose not to confront Rosalba immediately. Instead, they asked her to call her husband, Zomir, and request that he bring her personal documents since she only had her driver's license with her. They needed to investigate where the baby had come from and the source of the unusual wounds on the newborn. The condition of the baby suggested a delivery in an unsanitary setting, but the full extent of the horrifying crime had yet to be uncovered. Rosalba called Zomir, informing him that she was at the hospital and that their daughter had been born, but complications had arisen. She requested that he bring some paperwork and told him where to find it. Unfortunately, she made a major oversight. She forgot about a crucial piece of evidence. While gathering the documents, Zomir inadvertently picked up a medical record that belonged to someone else, specifically Flavia's file. She had taken the folder to review the test results and recommendations and later hidden it in her drawer with her own documents. When hospital staff noticed that the medical file belonged to a woman named Flavia Godinho, who was expecting a daughter in early September, They realized the baby seemed to be hers but was not with her. However, the pressing question remained, where was the real mother? The police immediately began to suspect Zomir could be involved. He was detained, questioned about how he had obtained someone else's medical file and where his wife had gotten the baby. Clearly confused and shaken, he claimed he had no idea what was happening. When informed that Rosalba had never been pregnant, he was visibly stunned. He then asserted that this was not true, stating he had cared for Rosalba throughout her pregnancy and even claimed to have felt the baby move. He presented photos from their maternity shoot and messages he believed were from the doctor monitoring her pregnancy. However, these messages turned out to be incriminating. They were filled with spelling errors and incorrect medical terminology. Authorities quickly discovered that the texts had come from Rosalba's own phone. After laying out all the facts, Zomir broke down in tears, covering his face with his hands. He had truly trusted his wife and was eagerly anticipating becoming a father. Meanwhile, Flavia's husband, Valdelli, had reported her missing. He informed the police that she had left with a friend to attend a baby shower, expecting to return by 9 p.m., but she never came back and her phone was off. Worried, Valdelli began calling other guests who were said to be invited to the party, only to find out in shock that the event had been cancelled the day before. As Valdelli continued to attempt to reach Rosalba, the friend who supposedly organized the gathering, his concern deepened when he discovered her phone was also turned off. Realizing he couldn't wait any longer, he went directly to the police. However, law enforcement had not yet received the hospital report regarding Rosalba and the newborn, so they were unaware that the cases might be linked. The officers said they would start searching in the morning, but that wasn't sufficient for Valdelli. He teamed up with Flavia's parents and other relatives to begin their own search. They divided into teams to cover more areas, and Valdelli decided to check the outskirts of town. It was there, while passing by an abandoned factory, that he chose to stop and investigate. Tragically, he found his wife's body, brutally disfigured. Shocked and terrified, he quickly called the police, unable to understand what had happened or who could commit such a horrific act. When the police arrived, they had already been informed by the hospital about Rosalba. This woman also possessed a medical file belonging to a woman named Flavia Godinho. The authorities realized that the name of the victim discovered at an abandoned factory matched the name on the stolen medical file, which clarified the case. Forensic evidence showed that the victim had been hit at least 5 times in the head with a brick, but these injuries were not fatal on their own. The cause of death was identified as severe blood loss due to a violent attempt to remove the baby. A box cutter used in the act was found near the body. With all the evidence pointing to Rosalba's guilt, it became a straightforward case. DNA testing confirmed that the baby Rosalba attempted to claim was indeed Flavia's daughter. Despite the strong evidence against her, Rosalba continued to deny her involvement and maintained her story. Her fingerprints were discovered on the knife beside Flavia's body. Flavia's blood was found on her clothes, shoes, and hair. Investigators confirmed that Rosalba had a miscarriage months earlier and had lied about still being pregnant. She had premeditated the crime, choosing her victim in advance to take the baby, without considering the consequences of her actions. Rosalba was convicted of aggravated homicide, infanticide, concealment of a corpse, obstruction of justice, kidnapping of a minor, and denial of rights to infants. In hopes of receiving a lighter sentence, she later recounted the events in detail, shocking everyone in the courtroom. Her attorney claimed that Rosalba had suffered a psychological breakdown after her miscarriage and became obsessed with motherhood, losing touch with reality. However, a psychological evaluation determined that she was mentally competent and fully accountable for her actions. She was sentenced to 57 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving at least half of her sentence. Zomir, Rosalba's husband, was completely exonerated. It was established that he had no knowledge of his wife's plans and had no part in the crime. Shortly after her arrest, he filed for divorce and moved away from São João Batista. Flavia's family also chose to leave the small town after the legal proceedings were finished. The case had become the most talked about topic in the community, and they wanted to protect young Cecilia, the name they chose for Flavia's daughter. The tragic murder of Flavia Godinho Mafra stands as a chilling reminder of how far desperation and obsession can drive a person to commit unspeakable acts. The small, tight-knit community of São João Batista was forever changed by this brutal crime, which shattered their sense of safety and trust. Flavia, a beloved teacher and soon-to-be mother, was robbed of her life and dreams by someone she considered a friend, leaving her family and community to grapple with unimaginable grief. Rosalba Maria Grimes' calculated deception and heinous actions not only took a life but also exposed the depths of her fixation on fulfilling a fantasy at any cost. While justice was served with her conviction, the scars left on Flavia's loved ones and the town will endure. Cecilia, Flavia's daughter, survives as a symbol of hope amidst tragedy, raised by a family determined to honor her mother's memory. This case underscores the profound consequences of unchecked ambition and the devastating ripple effects of betrayal, serving as a somber lesson in the value of empathy, honesty, and the sanctity of human life. Mariana Jocelyn Baltira Valenzuela was born on November 24, 1998, in the city of Ixtapan de la Sal, located in the state of Mexico. She is the older sibling of 2 children from a modest family. Fate decreed that she had to fight for her life from her first days. She was born much earlier than expected, and doctors seriously feared that the child, with a critically low weight, would not survive, which they informed her parents, Syra and Orlando. Mariana spent the first 2 months of her life in a hospital, in a special ward for premature babies. Her mother prayed day and night for her daughter's health, and her prayers were answered. The girl quickly recovered and gained weight. By the new year of 1999, she was discharged home, allowing her parents to celebrate the holiday with their daughter. Fortunately, Mariana had no external consequences of prematurity. She grew up slim and beautiful, but her health was very poor from a very early age. When Mariana was 4 years old, a second child appeared in the family, a boy. Mariana adored her younger brother and helped her parents take care of him. From the earliest age, they were very close and practically inseparable. At the age of 6, Mariana was diagnosed with epilepsy, which required her to regularly take special medications to minimize the likelihood of seizures. The prescribed drugs and constant monitoring by specialists yielded good results, allowing her to lead a relatively ordinary life, not too different from her peers. Moreover, she treated her health responsibly, following the regimen and taking the necessary medications. Mariana studied well at school, drew beautifully, and loved music. She was a very kind, open, and sincere girl. Everyone who knew her personally spoke positively about her. However, she was also modest and shy, especially in her teenage years. She had only a couple of best friends, did not go on dates, did not attend parties, and hardly interacted with boys. Mariana preferred to spend time at home with her family, with whom she had very close and warm relationships. The fragile and petite girl looked much younger than her age. At 16, she seemed no older than 13. Kind-hearted and sympathetic, Mariana always tried to help homeless animals, which she fed, treated, looked after, and then handed over to safe hands. As a high school student, she finally decided to become a veterinarian and provide professional assistance to those in need. Her parents often said that their daughter was too naive and trusting. She didn't perceive evil or danger from other people, as she herself brought only light and kindness into the world. Therefore, her father and mother were always worried that Mariana could be offended or harmed by someone taking advantage of her innocence. The area where the Baltira family lived was relatively calm. Almost everyone who lived there knew each other by sight. However, along their street, there were a large number of shops where many migrant workers worked unofficially. Some of them lived right in the shops, as most did not have their own housing, and some could not even afford to rent a room. Naturally, among these workers were individuals with extensive criminal histories. But, as long as they performed their duties properly, the shop owners usually had no complaints about them. About 50 meters from the Baltira family home was a butcher shop. The shop owner hired 4 workers, 2 locals who sold goods, 2 immigrants unloading cargo, butchered carcasses, and cleaned the store. The shop owner allowed the workers to stay on the second floor of the shop, which was an attic. As Mariana grew older, her parents began to periodically ask her to go shopping for the family, including to the aforementioned butcher shop. There she repeatedly encountered one Cruz Quintero Martinez, a worker of the landlord who lived on the second floor. She felt fear of this man just by his presence. She repeatedly told her friends and her parents that there was something sinister in his gaze that made her blood run cold. At the same time, there was nothing specific she could blame on this man since he did not approach her or attempt to contact her in any way, but merely looked at her. So her parents decided not to let their daughter go to this store anymore and went shopping for the necessities themselves. At some point, Juan Martinez committed a minor theft, resulting in the store owner's decision to fire him. After that incident, they did not hear from him for about a year. However, in early summer 2017, he returned to his former workplace, tearfully begged his former employer to rehire him, assuring him that he would work diligently. Remarkably, he was rehired and moved back into the second floor of the store. Cyrus' niece was visiting the Baltiras while Mariana and her younger brother were on summer vacation, with Orlando being the only one at work. Around 9 a.m., Syra asked her daughter to go to the local supermarket to buy breakfast. She believed her daughter was old enough to handle such a task. Moreover, the street was well lit and crowded. In her opinion, nothing bad could happen. She gave her daughter some money and asked Mariana to buy milk, eggs, and vegetables. Mariana left the house dressed in an old t-shirt and pajama pants. The store was located less than a couple of hundred meters from their house, so the round trip to get there, buy the necessary items, and return should not have taken more than half an hour. However, when an hour passed and Mariana still had not returned, her mother grew concerned, especially since Mariana's phone was left at home. With her little niece in her arms, Syra went to look for her daughter. She walked down the street to the store and asked the cashiers if they had seen a young girl in glasses. They informed her that a girl fitting her description had bought groceries a quarter of an hour ago and had left the store. Panic began to set in. Syra realized that something terrible had happened. Syra returned home, asked her son to look after his niece, and then went out to the street, where she began asking neighbors, street vendors, and passers-by if they had seen her daughter. However, it seemed as if the girl had vanished without a trace. Syra immediately reported the incident to the police and called her husband, who rushed home from work to help find their daughter. By the time the police arrived at the scene, dozens of neighbors, as well as relatives and friends of the Baltira family, had already joined the search. They called all of Mariana's acquaintances, combed the streets, and posted printed leaflets with her photographs. Initially, law enforcement officials were not particularly concerned about the situation. They asked the parents whether their daughter could have gone on a date or visited someone. Syra and Orlando insisting that their daughter would never go anywhere without informing them, especially since she had gone to the store in her home clothes and with a grocery bag, knowing she was expected back home. There were surveillance cameras installed in the area where Mariana disappeared, but almost none of them were functional. The entire day of searching yielded no results, and not a single trace of the girl was found. As night fell, anxiety and panic turned into despair. The parents realized that they would likely never see Mariana alive again. The next day, July 28th, at about 8 a.m., Mariana's parents received a call from a nearby relative, who informed them that several police cars had arrived at a butcher's shop. Without hesitation, the Baltira got ready and went to the indicated location. Law enforcement agencies did not allow them inside. But Syra and Orlando had no intention of leaving. Minutes after checking the scene, one of the police officers informed Orlando that the body of a young girl, identified as the missing Mariana, had been found on the second floor of the building, lifeless and badly mutilated. Orlando was invited inside to confirm her identity, but Syra was strongly advised against entering, as the crime scene was truly shocking. Orlando could not believe his eyes as he looked at the body lying in a puddle of blood, his daughter. His world collapsed in an instant, and he did not know how to tell his wife, who was waiting outside. Mariana had been repeatedly abused and brutally mutilated. The cause of death was massive blood loss due to a stab wound to the stomach. The perpetrator cut open her abdomen while she was still alive, leaving her to bleed to death. An expert opinion showed that her death occurred on the night of July 27th, just a few hours before the discovery of her body. Therefore, she was alive for almost 24 hours from the time of her disappearance, during which the criminal abused her until he fatally wounded her. The murder weapon, a knife intended for cutting up carcasses, was found on the floor next to her body. The body was discovered by the owner of the store when he arrived for work that morning. According to him, every last Thursday of the month was designated as cleaning day, during which he did not work. On that day, the owner was engaged in organizational matters, meetings with suppliers, and submitting reports to the tax office while his employees cleaned and disinfected the premises. When he arrived in the morning, he immediately noticed blood stains on the floor. Initially thinking that one of his employees living on the second floor had been injured, he was shocked to find bloody men's clothing, a knife, and the body of a young girl in a pool of blood. In addition, a large sum of money had gone missing from the cash register, which the criminal had evidently taken upon fleeing. Two men who lived and worked at the store immediately came under suspicion. However, one of them showed up for work an hour later, appearing just as shocked as everyone else. He explained that he had to return home to another city urgently, and his colleague, Juan, said Juan would cover for him and clean the store himself. The police concluded that this man was telling the truth, noting that there were no traces of him at the crime scene, and he was excluded from the list of suspects. By that time, CCTV footage from the supermarket, which Mariana had visited on the last day of her life, was obtained. The footage showed she entering the store, followed by Juan a few minutes later, the man who worked at the butcher's shop and had instilled genuine fear in Mariana. He stalked his victim like a wild animal hunting prey, following her out of the supermarket without purchasing anything. After that, both of their trails vanished. Reconstructing the sequence of events outside the store proved impossible. Although there were cameras on the street, they were non-functional, and none of the numerous passers-by or street sellers reported anything suspicious. Mariana's parents were convinced that their daughter would never have gone with this man, no matter how he might have lured her. They believed he had forcibly taken her to the store. However, they were left wondering why she did not scream or call for help, and why none of the many passers-by or street vendors noticed anything unusual about the situation. 27-year-old Juan Cruz Quintero Martinez was characterized as withdrawn and uncommunicative. Those who knew him said that he was a violent person with sadistic tendencies, which he displayed towards homeless animals. Previously, he had attracted the attention of the police for harassment and causing serious bodily harm. He got a job as a worker in a butcher's shop in early 2015. For a long time, according to the shop owner, there were no questions or complaints about him. Juan did his job conscientiously, but in mid-2016, he was caught stealing money and was subsequently fired. After losing his job, he returned to his parents' home, where his sick elderly mother and his sister, who took care of her, lived. For almost a year, Juan literally sat on their necks, stealing money, selling things from the house, abusing alcohol, and using illegal substances. In addition, he regularly beat his mother and sister. One day, tired of the constant bullying, his sister threatened to call the police if he did not leave the house. Juan, unwilling to deal with law enforcement again, obediently left. Since he had nowhere else to go, he asked his former employer to rehire him. The owner of the butcher shop agreed, providing him with a place to work and a roof over his head, allowing him to continue living on the second floor. It was mid-June 2017, just a month before the tragedy. Juan did his job conscientiously, but about a week later, he met Mariana, who had come of age and literally drove him crazy. She avoided him and never went to that store for shopping. Nevertheless, Juan began to follow her on the streets, discovering where she was going, what paths she was choosing. The second worker who lived with him also noticed his unhealthy interest in Mariana and even tried to joke about it, not suspecting that Juan would soon commit a crime. After Juan became the only suspect in the brutal abuse and murder of Mariana, all available resources were put into searching for him. Initially, law enforcement agencies went to his house, believing that relatives might help him escape. However, his sister insisted that he was not welcome there and that Juan knew his relatives would immediately hand him over to the police. She was not even surprised by the terrible crime her brother had committed. Moreover, she described how he had abused her elderly mother and even attacked the old woman with a knife, threatening to cut her open like a pig if he was not given money for illegal substances. The search for the killer was a priority for the police because Juan was extremely aggressive, violent, and dangerous to others. The money stolen from the cash register would have lasted him a long time, but no one knew how he would behave next or whether he would commit another crime after killing. Throughout the month, the search continued in the Ecatepec area and surrounding suburbs because the police believed that the criminal could not have gone far. However, time passed, and no trace of Juan was found. Soon, information about the abuse and brutal murder of Mariana reached national news, and police from across the state joined the search for the brutal criminal. Juan Martinez's photo appeared daily on television news, was printed on the front pages of newspapers, and was posted on streets all over the country with the note, "Ruthless Killer at Large." A large cash reward was announced for information about his whereabouts, as well as for assistance in his arrest, which was constantly increasing. But even this did not contribute to any progress in the case. The search for the criminal proved difficult, as he had not maintained contact with any relatives and had no friends. Additionally, Juan did not have social media pages and did not even use a mobile phone, let alone credit cards. After 6 months of unsuccessful search attempts, the reward for any information about him was increased to 500,000 Mexican pesos. Even this, however, did not help. Justice for the murder took over 2 years, finally arriving in August 2019 when her executioner was located and arrested. He was found in another state, almost 1,000 kilometers from the crime scene, when he was accidentally recognized on the street by a vigilant elderly woman. He constantly hid his face behind a hood and sunglasses, seemed suspicious to her, so she decided to report him to the police, not suspecting that he was one of Mexico's most wanted criminals. Juan was arrested right on one of the city streets, and to the surprise of law enforcement agencies, he did not even resist. He obediently held out his hands, allowing them to put handcuffs on him. The next day, after his identity was confirmed, the criminal was taken to the city of Ecatepec, where he had committed his crime. He was placed in custody in one of the city's prisons awaiting trial. In May 2022, 5 years after the tragedy, the killer and abuser was finally sentenced. Juan Martinez received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he was ordered to pay 1 million Mexican pesos in compensation for moral damages to the family of Mariana. Mariana's parents and brother said the arrest of the killer was a huge relief to them, as he would certainly not be able to harm other girls. However, even life imprisonment and a large monetary compensation cannot erase the pain from their hearts, as their beloved daughter and sister will not return. They will have to live with this for the rest of their days. The Missouri community believes that Christianity involves more than just having the right beliefs about God. They emphasize the importance of inner devotion, moral growth, and genuine repentance. They meet at home, hold educational gatherings. The Missouri are committed to following biblical principles, which include loving one's enemies and rejecting all forms of violence. This is the kind of environment Jeffrey David Borlase was raised in. In his youth, he got a summer job at the water park in Missouri. On his very first day at work, Jeffrey met a charming girl who, like him, wanted to earn a few dollars during the school holidays. Her name was Tanya May. Jeffrey was smitten. His heart told him that he had met the one with whom he would spend his whole life. Tanya was born on September 13, 1974. She was raised in a family where Christian values were paramount, patient, indulgent, and selfless. Tanya saw in Jeffrey her other half, a wonderful husband, and a loving father. Everything happened as they hoped. They got married. Inspired by love and hope, they created a strong family. Then, 4 children were born. True to their beliefs, Jeffrey and Tanya decided to take in 4 more boys from an orphanage to raise, making a total of 8 children: Taylor, Kaya, Alexis, Meseret, Tristan, Eli, Stephen, and Meliku Borlase. As time went by, the kids grew up. Their daughter, Taylor, despite the age difference, was very close to her brothers, with whom she loved to play pranks. They also shared common interests. The children were involved in sports and music. This continued until 2015, when Taylor did not finish high school and did not move to Boone to attend Appalachian State University. However, whenever the opportunity arose, the girl visited her relatives. Meanwhile, Tristan grew up like any other child. Sometimes he got annoyed with his parents, for example, when he was not allowed to use a cell phone or social media until a certain age. He was also forbidden to date girls until he graduated from high school. Overall, all the children in the family, regardless of whether they were born in marriage or adopted, grew up in a harmonious atmosphere and were not deprived of love or affection. Their loving mother closely monitored the internal order of relations between brothers and sisters, prayed frequently, and did good deeds. There was one incident that will forever remain in Robin's moth memory: Tanya's compassionate mother. Her daughter sold her expensive wedding ring and replaced it with a cheap one to help build houses for residents of Haiti affected by the hurricane in December 2017. Pleasant changes occurred in the life of the family as Jeffrey, his wife, and children moved to a new house in Watauga County, North Carolina. The new house was more spacious, had a larger lot, and was located just under 2 miles from Robin. This would be very convenient, especially when help was needed with babysitting. Around the same time, Tristan, who was in high school, started to participate in track and field. Alexis and Kaya worked as counselors at summer camps. At first glance, it might seem that the Borlase household never had any problems or troubles, but this was not the case. Over time, Tristan's behavior began to raise concerns. By 2019, while in high school, he started having difficulties understanding some school subjects, and these challenges only increased day by day. In addition, sometimes the boy behaved inappropriately. Although by that time he had everything, he constantly argued with his parents about his own mobile phone and access to social media. Tristan spent a lot of time on his Instagram account. The eldest of the Borlase children, Taylor, was always interested in the lives of her brothers and sisters and noticed that Tristan often quarreled with their parents. She also learned about his other problems. Some teachers tried to push Tristan to give his all. One of them was initially saw in Tristan a smart student with great potential. However, he soon became convinced that Tristan, who was frequently late for classes, was not interested in studying at all. Tristan withdrew from the school community, was indifferent to everything, and did not want to try. It got to the point where he wore headphones during class and sat with a vacant expression. The teacher tried to help Tristan, and one day after class, they had a heart-to-heart talk. It was a very productive conversation, and Tristan assured his teacher that he would try to achieve more, but in the end, he did not see any improvements. After a while, Tristan became friends with a girl from their religious community, Evelyn. They began dating, and he sometimes shared his frustrations about his relationship with his family, mentioning the frequent quarrels with his mother and father. On April 10, 2019, Tristan's teacher called his parents to complain about his academic performance and behavior. Jeffrey and Tanya left their youngest child with his grandmother and went to the middle school to understand what was happening. That same day, Taylor received a text from her mother, asking if she knew that Tristan was using illegal substances. Later, Tanya explained to Taylor that she had taken Tristan's phone to investigate the claim. After 4 p.m., Tanya informed her mother, Robin, that the conversation with Tristan had gone well. Although they had taken away his phones and car keys until he started behaving normally and focusing on school, Tristan didn't seem upset. They returned home. They decided to take the family dog for a walk together. Before that, Jeffrey headed to his van while Tanya went into the house. Much of what happened afterward cannot be fully reconstructed, but it is clear that inside the house, Tristan suddenly attacked his mother with a knife, presumably taken from the kitchen, and stabbed her deeply. At about 5 p.m., cameras and CCTV installed outside filmed Tristan running across the yard, covered in blood. At that moment, Jeffrey saw him and got out of the car. Tristan walked up to him and suddenly attacked him. As Jeffrey ran away, he tripped, and Tristan rushed at him. First, Tristan hit him with his fist and then stabbed him multiple times. Neighbors reported that on that Wednesday at about 5:30 p.m., they heard loud screams. Tristan's hands were covered in blood. He went into the kitchen, where he had previously dragged his lifeless mother's body, picked her up, and carried her outside. Then he spent about an hour cleaning up the scene, even using a hose to wash the porch near the house. Around 8:30 p.m., Tristan went to his grandmother Robin's house to pick up his younger brother. She was surprised and asked him about his parents. He said that they had gone to the store for shopping. After about 20 minutes passed without any word from Tanya and Jeffrey, Robin felt a strong worry as such behavior was extremely unusual. At that moment, another grandson called her to tell her that his parents had not picked him up as they usually did. Robin immediately contacted Alexis and Taylor. They agreed to pick up the boy and meet together at the family home. Alexis arrived first with her boyfriend. It was already dark outside. Upon entering the house, they were horrified to see traces of blood on the carpet. Assuming that Jeffrey and Tanya might be in the storehouse, they headed there. Under the hammock, they saw Jeffrey's wrapped body. Alexis rushed to him, but her boyfriend tried to hold her back. He grabbed her and dragged her toward the house, saying that they should call 911. A few seconds later, they saw Tristan driving away in his father's black car. Despite his fleeting appearance, Alexis and her boyfriend managed to notice the blood on his face and hands. Meanwhile, Tristan contacted his friend Evelyn and went to her house. She realized that he was worried about something and also noticed several scratches on his forehead and hands. However, Tristan assured her that he had just had a fight with his parents and got the scratches while playing with his dog. Around 10:30 p.m., the detective received a report filed by Alexis. He immediately went to the scene. Seeing a bloody trail in the Borlase house, the partners followed it upstairs but found nothing. Returning to the yard, they began to search it and soon came across the body of 43-year-old Jeffrey, who had stab wounds to his abdomen. Continuing the search of the area adjacent to the house, detectives found a car in the woods. Previously, relatives had reported that Jeffrey's car had disappeared from the yard. It looked like it was an unsuccessful attempt to hide the family's white 2000 Ford pickup truck. The investigators then realized why the criminal had needed it. In the cabin was the body of 44-year-old Tanya, covered with a blanket and stuffed with bags of mulch. The police began collecting evidence, noticing red stains on the floor, the dashboard, and the rear door of the car. Considering the seriousness of the events, an experienced investigator was urgently called in due to the case of serious crimes of the Watauga County Sheriff's Department. He arrived at approximately 11:35 p.m. and examined the crime scene, after which the officers reported to him the statements they had collected from relatives. Then investigator decided to take the family to the sheriff's office, as it was necessary to document the interview with each of them. First of all, the lead investigator interviewed Robin, who explained what she had been doing that day and what she had discussed with her daughter Tanya. Then it was Taylor's turn, who also told everything she knew. Tristan was undoubtedly the prime suspect, while investigators were trying to piece together the puzzle, and the family was in a state of shock. Tristan was spending time with his girlfriend. He stayed overnight with her. The next morning they went to Walmart and McDonald's. Tristan promised they would go to class together later, but that didn't happen. Evelyn believed he simply wanted to escape his parents for a bit, so he suggested staying with a relative. That same morning, Tristan invited her to get in the car, and they drove toward Tennessee. Meanwhile, a warrant was issued for the arrest of the suspected killer, and searches continued at the suspect's residence. The investigator processed evidence from the white pickup truck, which was difficult to handle because it was on a steep incline. The truck was taken to the sheriff's office, where an agent from the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation joined the team and took a total of 737 photos from the scene. At the same time, investigator learned that Tristan had been spotted in Tennessee. He began the paperwork for extraditing the suspect and considered traveling there with Robin to speak to Tristan, given that he was a minor. Information about the car was shared with the National Crime Information Center, prompting efforts in Tennessee to locate the vehicle. The search for the car began, leading to a chase. While driving with Evelyn, Tristan notices that someone seems to be following them. He told his girlfriend that he had to hurry and sharply increased speed. She naturally did not understand what was happening. To make her less confused, Tristan suggested that his parents probably reported the car as stolen to find him faster. Tristan raced along the highway but eventually succumbed and stopped. Their car was surrounded by police cars. Evelyn was completely confused seeing Tristan handcuffed and placed in a police car. Officers noticed that Tristan did not appear upset or worried. According to the county sheriff's office, both young men's clothes were stained with blood. Police officers obtained search warrants for their mobile phones. Tristan's interrogation, conducted by investigator on April 11, 2019, was recorded on video and audio. Tristan answered all questions and did not resist. At times, he was overwhelmed with emotion and cried, but he admitted that he had killed his parents, detailed all his actions. When investigator asked him about his relationship with Jeffrey, Tristan stated that he had never feared Jeffrey's cruelty, let alone that he could hit his son. Tristan also mentioned that he wanted to go back to the house but got scared when he saw police cars and fled. Accused of 2 counts of murder, Tristan Borlase was taken into custody without bail, set to appear in court on May 7, 2019. In later statements, the Watauga County Sheriff remarked that the local population had never faced such serious danger, explaining that such incidents are unpredictable and very rare. This was, of course, very sad. Speaking to local media, the district attorney thanked everyone for their joint efforts, stating that the high level of dedication shown during the investigation and the search for the truth should inspire society. The autopsy report on Tanya's body indicated that she had been stabbed several times, including in the left chest, back, and arm. She had received multiple stab wounds to her left arm, likely caused by defensive actions. Blunt trauma to the head, neck, torso, and limbs were also identified. There were reports of suffocation injuries that the victim may have sustained during neck compression. As for Jeffrey, the autopsy revealed multiple stab wounds to his left chest and back, in addition to cut wounds to his arms and hands, abrasions to his scalp and forehead, blunt force trauma to his torso and limbs. Jeffrey and Tanya's funeral took place on April 17, 2019, at the Alliance Bible Fellowship. Relatives of the victims wrote a mournful obituary in which all 7 children expressed that Tanya and Jeffrey never had the opportunity to live for themselves, as they always lived only for their children. Instead of flowers, memorial contributions to the family fund were requested. By this time, search warrants had been issued to examine data from home surveillance cameras, video call accounts allegedly belonging to Tristan, and a total of 5 mobile phones that could contain information related to the crime. Having gained access to the CCTV footage, detective investigator began reconstructing the chronology of events. The investigators continued their work. Inside the car, they found Tristan's report card from Watauga County School, several pens, electronic cigarettes, a plastic container with purchases, and a receipt from McDonald's issued at 6:40 a.m. on April 11, 2019. Additionally, they found a North Carolina driver's license issued in the name of Jeffrey Borlase in the glove compartment. In the driver's side door compartment was a black pocket knife with stains on the blade that looked like blood. A week after Tristan's arrest, Taylor visited him in jail for the first time and was unpleasantly surprised by his behavior. Tristan was not only unrepentant but also tried to blame others for what happened. He was convinced that sooner or later he would regain his freedom. Taylor felt disgusted, turned around, and left. Her second visit was on May 11th, on the occasion of Tristan's birthday. This time, she brought Robin. However, this meeting was almost indistinguishable from the previous one. For Taylor, such behavior was unacceptable, especially considering that their parents had died tragically, and she was now responsible for taking care of her orphaned brothers and sisters. After 3 weeks, the neighbors decided to help the Borlase children, organized a fundraising campaign to cover the costs of maintaining the property, food, gasoline, car insurance, and clothes. During this time, Tristan had phone conversations from the prison cell, where he insisted on a new version of events. According to him, his mother first attacked him from behind while he was sitting at the table doing his homework. The trial of Tristan began on February 16, 2022. His lawyer stated that his client was responsible for murder, but not for the charge of first-degree murder. The prosecution, Assistant District Attorney Jasmine McKinney, told jurors that despite being a very large family with children who were not always well-behaved, they never lacked love. Testimonies were heard from 5 witnesses, 2 of whom were law enforcement officers, and 3 were relatives of the victims, including Robin, Taylor, and Alexis. On February 17th, the jury was presented with diagrams of the crime scene, obtained from photographic work. Also on this day, Evelyn testified. On February 20th, during the 4th day of the trial, 3 witnesses were questioned. On the 5th day, a pathologist shared her findings, although Tristan's defense objected to the display of post-mortem photographs of Jeffrey and Tanya. The judge allowed the images to be shown, ensuring that they were not extreme, pointless, or used solely to incite passion. Using post-mortem diagrams and autopsy footage taken by an experienced photographer, the pathologist noted that both deceased individuals had small abrasions on their palms and forearms, indicating they were trying to defend themselves from the weapon used by the criminal. Jeffrey and Tanya attempted to shield themselves with their hands when they were attacked, but unfortunately, it was to no avail. She reported that the cause of death for both spouses was stab wounds to the body. After the lunch break, the prosecution called Tristan for questioning. He was asked to describe what his father and mother were like. Tristan said that in their house, they always loved to read and laughed a lot, but there was also constant chaos due to the large number of children and animals. He noted that Jeffrey and Tanya focused on raising their children, teaching them to help each other and show compassion. Tristan remembered having disagreements with his parents but believed they never crossed the line. Rather, there was always an opportunity to discuss problems and misunderstandings openly. Detective investigator was called to the courtroom and testified using video recordings from surveillance cameras. The ninth day of the trial took place on February 28, 2022. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury found Tristan Borlase guilty and sentenced him to 2 life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. In a later statement, the district attorney expressed his sincere hope that this decision would bring closure to the Borlase family. According to the latest news, Tristan faces additional charges for a fight in prison. Tristan was charged with a misdemeanor for assaulting another inmate, allegedly punching him in the face and kneeing him in the chest. Taylor and Alexis continue to care for the children and console them with the hope that their parents are not in pain and are looking down on them from heaven, concerned for each of their children. The children will never forget the love and care their mom, dad surrounded them with. Undoubtedly, Jeffrey and Tanya Borlase became symbols of kindness and mercy, which they generously bestowed upon the world during their lives. In 2012, a 17-year-old girl named Jessica Evans was living with her mother, Chris. Just before summer vacation, she met 22-year-old Jacob Wheeler, who had recently moved across the street to his brother's house. They connected at a party and quickly developed a bond. Jacob was a quiet country boy who had recently returned from a 3-year stint in Iraq. Although he was 5 years older than Jessica, Chris felt reassured and trusted him. On August 26, 2012, Jessica asked Chris for permission to join Jacob on a night fishing trip at the Little Wabash River, a popular location. Initially hesitant, Chris eventually agreed after Jessica persuaded her, but insisted that Jessica be careful and return home by 5 a.m. She assured her mother that she understood and would return to her sister Megan's house at that time to babysit her nephew Miles. Little did she know that this fishing trip would be her last. Just before midnight, Chris called Jessica to check on her. Jessica assured her mother that she was fine and that she and Jacob were nearly done fishing and would be home soon. However, when Chris woke up at 5 the next morning, she realized that Jessica had not returned home. This was unusual, especially since Jessica had plans to babysit her nephew. Concerned, Chris tried calling Jessica's cell phone, but there was no answer. She also sent text messages that went unanswered. Chris felt something was wrong. She was sure Jessica would inform her if plans changed. Chris went to Jacob's house, but his brother Jeremy said that Jacob hadn't come home either. Jeremy wasn't worried because he believed Jacob could handle himself. However, by 9 a.m., Jessica's family was beginning to worry. Chris thought it was possible that Jacob's truck had broken down or that they were stuck somewhere. After 12 hours without any news about Jessica and Jacob, Chris contacted the White County Sheriff's Office for assistance. Sheriff Doug Meyer, who was relaxing at home, received the call but wasn't overly concerned. He speculated that Jessica and Jacob might have run away together and figured they were likely okay, but he needed to find out where they had gone. The sheriff decided to request a warrant to trace Jessica's cell phone, but that could take some time. Meanwhile, the sheriff's deputies followed the family's advice and headed to the spot where Jessica and Jacob were supposed to be fishing. The area was remote, accessible only by gravel roads. The deputies found a 50-foot-long overgrown path that led to a popular fishing location. They saw clear signs that someone had been there, such as abandoned packages, but there were no signs of any trouble or crime. An extinguished campfire was present, but the area was clean, and Jacob's truck was missing. However, the sheriff's intuition about Jessica and Jacob led him to believe that nothing serious had happened. It seemed like they were simply hanging out together. Eventually, the sheriff obtained records from Jessica's cell phone carrier to help track her phone. They discovered that the phone's signal was coming from a tower near the campground area where she and Jacob had been fishing. This indicated that Jessica's phone was still active and nearby, which contradicted the sheriff's assumption that she had simply run away. If Jessica and Jacob were still there, why weren't they answering their phones? Investigators began to worry that they might be stranded, injured, or worse. News of Jessica and Jacob's disappearance quickly spread through Norris City, raising alarms in the community. Some speculated that they had just run away, but Chris was confident that Jessica would not do that. Upon learning that Jessica's cell phone was still in the vicinity of the fishing site, the sheriff's office felt a growing sense of unease about the situation. At dawn the following day, officers from the White County Sheriff's Office, along with neighboring law enforcement and many volunteers, returned to the fishing area to search for any traces of Jacob and Jessica. Their families also joined in the search. However, after 3 hours, they had no leads. Neither Jacob nor Jessica nor their pickup truck was found. The pickup must have been at the scene if something had happened to them. But what if they had discarded their phones and fled? If they had indeed left together, they would eventually create an electronic footprint. The police also checked their bank card usage to see if there had been any transactions but found no activity. While there were no significant findings in the bank statements, one clue emerged from Jessica's phone records. The police were aware of the midnight call from Chris, but Jessica had another phone conversation shortly after, around 12:30 a.m. on Sunday night. Investigators identified the person she spoke with as a young man named Ron Wooderson. His name was familiar to the police due to his past legal issues, raising their suspicions about his involvement. Consequently, they decided to interview Ron to understand the details of their conversation. Sheriff's deputies met with Ron and asked him about his last interaction with Jessica. He eventually acknowledged that he called her late at night, stating he was at a party with friends. Ron claimed he wanted Jessica to join him at the party, but when she mentioned she was busy fishing, Jacob, her boyfriend, grabbed the phone. Ron explained that Jacob had explicitly prohibited him from calling Jessica, which led to a heated argument, primarily fueled by Jacob's anger over Ron contacting his girlfriend. The deputies recorded the names of other party attendees and verified Ron's alibi. They found that everyone else confirmed he did not leave the party after the call. By the end of the day, search volunteers were ready to go home without any leads. However, one of Jacob's friends, while riding an ATV, discovered a pickup truck hidden in the woods behind an old farmhouse, about 2 miles from where Jacob and Jessica had been fishing. It turned out to be Jacob's truck. The situation quickly became distressing when they found a woman's body in the back of the truck, shot twice in the head. Her condition raised further alarm. She was partially clothed, with some of her clothes strewn on the ground nearby. Investigators suspected that more than just a murder had occurred. The victim had no identification, but in such a tight-knit community, that was not a significant issue. Some of the investigators recognized Jessica from her entire life, and it became clear that they had just discovered her body. The discovery of Jessica's body marked a turning point. This suggested that she may have met with a man before her death and may have fought back. Authorities hoped that the coroner could obtain DNA evidence from the crime scene. The police searched the area around the pickup and found shell casings that matched the 2 wounds on Jessica's head. The casings were located on the right side of the truck, next to a large bloodstain, indicating that Jessica had been shot at that location. As investigators examined Jacob's pickup truck, which was filled with fishing gear and personal belongings, they noted that Jacob was missing. A crucial clue emerged when they discovered blood in the driver's side cab of the truck. Blood samples were sent for DNA testing to determine whose blood it was and to locate Jacob. Law enforcement began to consider Jacob as a potential suspect, questioning whether he was a victim himself or if he was responsible for Jessica's death. Community suspicions arose, with some believing that Jacob, a veteran, had the skills to commit murder. Speculation swirled that a late-night phone call from Ron might have triggered a violent reaction from Jacob. Investigators grew increasingly concerned about Jacob's mental state, particularly if he felt he was losing Jessica. The day after Jessica's body was found, the police obtained a search warrant for Jacob's brother's house, suspecting that Jacob might be hiding there. Although they didn't find him, they discovered that one of his guns was missing. Jeremy, Jacob's brother, said there was no reason to worry. Jacob had simply taken the gun for a fishing trip, which he considered normal. However, investigators became concerned when they learned that the missing gun was a .22, matching the shell casings found at the crime scene. Despite this, Jacob's family insisted he was innocent, believing that he would have put his life on the line to protect Jessica if she had been in danger. As the week went by, the search for Jacob intensified. Police from multiple counties joined forces, deploying search teams, K-9 units, and aerial surveillance to locate him. The White County Crime Suppression Unit even offered a $2,000 reward for information leading to Jacob's capture. This reward prompted several calls to the sheriff's office with tips, but one was particularly noteworthy. An employee at a gas station located 12 miles from where Jessica's body was found reported seeing Jacob buy a pack of cigarettes on Sunday night, about a day after he and Jessica disappeared. The employee noted that Jacob was wearing a camouflage hooded sweatshirt and recalled seeing an ID card in his wallet that appeared to belong to Jacob Wheeler. This made Jacob the primary suspect in Jessica's case. As time passed, it seemed increasingly likely that Jacob was on the run. Investigators visited the gas station to review surveillance footage, where they spotted a man in a hooded sweatshirt who partially obscured his face and avoided looking directly at the camera. Although it was a warm night and would have been uncomfortable in such attire, it was difficult to confirm with certainty that he was Jacob. The man quickly purchased cigarettes and left the store. While the footage from one camera did not reveal his face, a second camera outside captured him getting into a car driven by a woman, a person one of the sheriff's deputies recognized. Police quickly went to the woman's home, where they saw the car from the gas station video parked nearby. When questioned by investigators, the woman admitted to driving the man to the gas station but insisted he wasn't Jacob, claiming he was her boyfriend instead. This left the identity of the man in the video as a dead end, and all police attention turned back to Jacob. Detectives believed he was alive and suspected his brother Jeremy of hiding him. They searched his house at night to catch him off guard, but even after a second search, there was still no sign that he had been there. After Jacob disappeared, his brother and father were certain he had nothing to do with Jessica's death. His father, Harold, was determined to prove his son's innocence. He believed he was searching for Jacob's body, not the body of his son. 6 days later, Sheriff Doug Meyer received a call from Harold, who mentioned that he had discovered something that others had overlooked. He believed he saw car parts in a wooded area just a quarter mile from where Jacob and Jessica were camping. Investigators decided to follow up on this lead and found some car parts, specifically pieces that belonged to the fender of a pickup truck. The area where the parts were located showed damage to the trees, indicating that a pickup truck had driven into the woods and through the trees, causing damage. However, it was clear that these were not Jacob's truck. While the connection to the crime was unclear, the discovery piqued investigators' interest as they had no other leads. One of the car parts had a serial number, which the police were able to look up online to determine the specific model of the pickup truck. In a small town, it's relatively easy to track down such a vehicle. One of the sheriff's deputies was familiar with a man named Danny Costin, a 36-year-old electrician from White County, who drove a similar truck. But could he be involved in a violent crime? Danny had never caused trouble, had no criminal record, and was a well-known member of the community. Investigators decided to visit his workplace to speak with him. They found his pickup truck in the parking lot, which had considerable damage consistent with the parts discovered in the woods. As the investigator examined the pickup truck, Sheriff Doug Meyer questioned Danny about the damage. Danny explained that he had gone fishing on the Little Wabash River but had difficulty launching his boat because he was very drunk. He couldn't remember much from that night, but he did recall that it had been around 1 a.m. on the same night that Jacob and Jessica went fishing. He insisted that he didn't see anyone else in the area during his time there. Meanwhile, investigators made a significant discovery. They found a considerable amount of blood in the back of Danny's pickup truck. He was visibly shocked when they informed him about it. The sheriff advised Danny that if he had anything to share, he should do so now. Danny then revealed that he had been in the woods that night and had witnessed Jacob attack Jessica twice. However, this account did not clarify why there was blood in his truck. Forensic analysis confirmed it was human blood. Investigators took Danny to the police station for further questioning. He reiterated that he was drunk, went to the Little Wabash River, and encountered Jacob and Jessica. He mentioned that Jacob had gone into the woods, leaving him alone with Jessica. Danny claimed that Jessica had come on to him of her own accord. He said they went to his truck and parked 2 miles away behind an abandoned farmhouse. According to him, they had consensual intimate contact until Jacob found them in the dark. An argument broke out between Jacob and Jessica, during which Jacob attacked her. Danny stated that he felt scared when Jacob approached him, leading to a struggle during which the gun went off, injuring Jacob. He claimed this shot was accidental. In a panic, he placed Jacob in the back of his pickup truck, worried that no one would believe his story of self-defense, so he concealed the body where it wouldn't be found. Danny provided detailed information about where he had left Jacob's body. The police were skeptical of Danny's story, as it did not align with Jessica's character. His account of how Jessica willingly came with him, only for Jacob to show up unexpectedly, seemed implausible. Ultimately, it was determined that he had attacked Jacob, thus confirming the suspicions held by Jacob's family. Consequently, Danny Kaytlin was arrested. Investigators followed Danny's directions to find Jacob's body, venturing deeper into the woods along a dirt road. After 6 days of searching, they discovered Jacob's body with a bullet wound in his head. Forensic evidence contradicted Danny's claims. Blood found in Jacob's pickup truck, which belonged to Jacob, did not align with Danny's narrative. He had previously stated that he placed Jacob's body in his own truck, raising questions about the source of the blood. During a reinterrogation, inconsistencies in Danny's account led him to admit the truth. He explained that he attempted to drive his truck to launch a boat, but, being very drunk and faced with dense woods, he sought help from Jacob and Jessica. Although Jacob advised against it because of Danny's intoxication, they eventually agreed to help him. After climbing into the back of Jacob's truck, Danny, armed with a pistol, unexpectedly shot Jacob in the head through the driver's side window, in full view of Jessica, who was terrified and screamed. Danny then pulls Jacob out of the truck, saying he has no idea why he shot Jacob or what his next actions will be. Jessica begs Danny to spare her life, which prompts the sheriff to ask if she will agree to intimacy in exchange for her safety. Danny interpreted her desperate plea for self-preservation as an offer, and he proceeded to assault her in the back of Jacob's truck. Despite her begging, he shot her, asserting afterward that he did not know why he committed these acts. Afterward, he transported Jessica's body in Jacob's truck, driving to Wayne County to hide Jacob's body while discarding both his gun and Jacob's gun out of the window during the trip. The police have never recovered either firearm. On September 4, 2012, Danny appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He later changed his testimony, claiming he had not been informed of his rights before questioning, but an appeals court dismissed his appeal. Video evidence from the interrogation showed that he was indeed read his rights. Additionally, police had strong evidence linking Danny to the crime. His truck contained Jacob's blood, and DNA from Jessica was found on his body. In January 2014, Candace Brown, Danny's girlfriend, was found guilty of lying to the authorities during the initial investigation. She had provided him with a false alibi. She was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 30 months of probation, 100 hours of community service, and was required to pay various court fees and fines. On August 20, 2013, Danny Kaytlin was convicted and sentenced to 53 years in prison. Judge Tom Foster stated he was constrained by the plea agreement between the state and defense but believed Danny deserved a harsher sentence. Danny had agreed to waive a jury trial in return for lesser charges and a potentially reduced sentence if found guilty. Judge Foster noted that the court accepted this deal only with the consent of Jessica's and Jacob's families.
On December 5, 1975, in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a married couple was on their way home from a school basketball game. At around 8:30 p.m., the wife decided to visit her niece, Lindy, who lived nearby. They parked their car near the apartment complex, and she got out to quickly check on her niece, leaving her husband in the car. However, when she reached the apartment, she discovered that the front door was unlocked. Cautiously peering inside, she saw a knocked-over floor lamp and other items scattered around. The disarray of the apartment indicated that a fight had occurred. When she noticed strange stains on the floor resembling blood, she stepped into the living room. What she discovered would haunt her forever. In the center of the room lay Lindy, with a knife stabbed into her throat. Overwhelmed with panic, she ran out of the house and hurried to her car to call the police. The police arrived at the scene and were baffled about who could have had a conflict with the young 19-year-old girl, who had recently gotten married. They wondered what could have led to her brutal murder. Lindy Sue Beekler was born on January 31, 1956. Her parents divorced when she was very young. She was raised by her mother. Her father moved to the suburbs, remarried, and had a son with his new wife, making him Lindy's half-brother. From a young age, Lindy was curious and cheerful. She loved exploring new activities. Lindy participated in the Girl Scouts, went hiking, enjoyed boating, and joined different clubs. Lindy was a positive person who made everyone feel good. Her bright smile encouraged others to smile too. Above all, she treasured her family. One of her favorite things to do was curl up on the couch with her mother. In those moments, she felt like the happiest person alive because her mother was not only a caring parent, but also her best friend. Recently, Lindy had been employed at a flower shop, where her boss and co-workers described her as very hardworking, humble, and somewhat shy. However, once they got to know her better, Lindy revealed her fun side. She had a great sense of humor. Despite this, she preferred not to be the center of attention. Lindy married at a young age despite her insecurities. Her husband, Philip Beekler, was 5 years older than her. They first met when Lindy was visiting her sister. They were instantly attracted to each other. On October 19th, the year before the attack, Lindy and Philip tied the knot. The ceremony was officiated by Philip's grandfather, who blessed their union, saying they were perfect for one another. Philip worked part-time as an agent at a car rental company while studying art at Millersville State College. It appeared he was inspired by his parents. His mother owned an art gallery and was deeply passionate about art. Lindy is just 2 months away from turning 20 and has recently begun to embrace adult life as a married woman. Philip and Lindy were happily living together in their small one-bedroom apartment. However, Lindy felt uneasy being home alone. She never felt safe since they moved in. She constantly sensed that someone was watching her through the sliding glass door, though she couldn't pinpoint anyone specific. Overall, she was simply afraid to be alone in the apartment. In January, they planned to move to a new place in Manor Township. In the evenings, Lindy got home from work a couple of hours before her husband. She would lock the doors and turn on all the lights, carefully listening to every noise. During the investigation of the crime scene, the police found that Lindy had been stabbed 19 times. The attack involved 2 different knives. One knife, which the attacker had brought, was never found, while the other knife came from Lindy's kitchen. This kitchen knife was still in her neck when her aunt discovered her. Lindy's body showed 11 stab wounds to her chest and upper abdomen, 5 to her back, and 3 to her neck. One of the stabs had pierced the carotid artery, causing her to bleed to death. Experts noted that Lindy had defensive wounds on her hands, suggesting she fought fiercely for her life until the very end. The apartment was in chaos, with blood everywhere. It appeared that, after finishing her shift at the flower shop, Lindy had stopped to buy groceries, as bags of food were left on the kitchen table, still unpacked. This indicates that the attack occurred right after she returned home. Several pieces of evidence were collected at the crime scene. A shoe print, likely size 10 or 11, was discovered on the kitchen floor. This print suggested that the attacker was likely a large, strong man. Another piece of evidence hinted at a possible motive, although Lindy was fully clothed when found. Detectives suspected she had been abused. Male fluid was discovered on her underwear, which could provide the perpetrator's DNA. However, in 1975, forensic capabilities were limited. Experts could only identify the attacker's blood type and compare it with that of a suspect, but they needed to identify a suspect first. Unfortunately, that was where the evidence trail ended. The police also lacked the perpetrator's fingerprints, as the knife handle found in Lindy's throat was wrapped in a kitchen towel. The news of Lindy's tragic death devastated her family. Relatives called Philip at work, telling him he needed to come home immediately because something had happened to Lindy. As he rushed to their apartment, he feared the worst, but he could never have imagined that his beloved wife had been brutally killed. The police did not allow Philip inside the apartment, leaving him confused about what had happened. They kept him in the hallway until he found out the heartbreaking news that Lindy was dead. Seeing how pale he became, medics gave him a sedative, and the police took him to his mother's house. For about 4 days, Philip felt lost. He couldn't tell whether it was day or night or how much time had passed since the tragedy. He had to sit and wait for answers while the police continued their investigation. Detectives interviewed her co-workers and employer, and none of them noticed anything unusual about her behavior. Lindy went to work at the flower shop in a good mood. That day, she did not appear anxious or scared. There were no dissatisfied customers. Everything was completely normal. Lindy excitedly shared with her colleagues about the Christmas gift she had prepared for her husband. That evening, she calmly got into her car, waved goodbye to her colleagues, and drove home. Unbeknownst to anyone, it would be her last evening alive. Around 5:30 p.m. After work, Lindy went to the car dealership where her husband, Philip, worked to pick up his paycheck. She cashed the check at the bank and then went to a nearby grocery store to buy groceries, filling 4 bags. Afterward, she headed home, parked her car, and began unloading the bags. It seemed likely she would need to make 2 trips. At that moment, someone likely entered her apartment and attacked her. Detectives speculated on this since there were no signs of forced entry, and Lindy was not the kind of person to let a stranger into her home. This led the police to believe that Lindy knew her attacker, felt safe being alone with them. The first person the detectives looked at as a suspect was the victim's husband, Philip. However, the family and friends insisting that Philip and Lindy were a happy couple. Philip deeply loved Lindy and felt incredibly lucky to be dating her. Amazed that someone so beautiful would be interested in him, he said she changed his life for the better by inspiring him to enroll in college and pursue painting. In return, he supported her dream of opening a flower shop. When Lindy was killed, it devastated Philip. He couldn't bear to stay in their apartment, where every corner reminded him of her, so he moved out. Although he had a strong alibi, investigators were slow to clear him as a suspect. Following Lindy's death, Philip felt lost. He wandered the streets for hours, dropped out of college. They had dreamt of finishing their studies, starting a family, and planning their future together. Now, in an instant, all their dreams collapsed, like a sandcastle washed away by the tide. Philip had to completely rebuild his life in light of this tragic reality. The second suspect in the investigation was Bob, Lindy's direct supervisor. His favorable comments and positive evaluations of Lindy took an unexpected turn. The day before her tragic death, Lindy baked him blueberry muffins for his birthday. Bob spoke so highly of her that police began to question whether he had developed an inappropriate attachment. At 35 years old, single, and without an alibi, Bob caught the attention of the authorities, prompting them to scrutinize him more closely. The pressure became overwhelming, leading him to hire a lawyer to safeguard his privacy. Bob passed a lie detector test and fully cooperated with the police. After clearing both Lindy's husband and Bob as suspects, the police interviewed hundreds of people, including friends, family, and acquaintances. Yet they found no one who might have wanted to harm her. Neighbors were also questioned, but no one reported seeing anything unusual that day. The atmosphere in the apartment complex grew tense as residents began purchasing weapons for protection. While violence in other neighborhoods was concerning, the murder of a young woman next door felt particularly alarming. A note from the police was taped to the Beekler's front door. indicating that it was a crime scene and restricting access for local residents. This served as a constant reminder of the tragedy and the unsettling reality that the killer might still be nearby. The investigation hit a dead end. The only clue from neighbors was a report of an unfamiliar dark-colored car parked outside Lindy's house at the time of her death, with its headlights on. Even if the driver was not involved in the crime, they could have been a witness. However, locating the car proved to be impossible. Neighbors' descriptions varied widely, and no one could recall the license plate number. Meanwhile, the police station was overwhelmed with calls. Although some leads seemed promising, none led to concrete answers, forcing investigators to develop their own theories. One theory suggested that Lindy was being stalked by someone who observed her and her husband's routines, waiting for the right moment to attack. It's possible the intruder entered the apartment while Lindy was unloading groceries, or that it was a burglar who planned to steal valuables, but panicked and assaulted her with a knife when she unexpectedly returned. However, the burglary theory was weak because Lindy's purse, containing her jewelry, was still in the apartment. Additionally, the nature of the abuse assault did not align with typical burglar behavior. The police eventually identified an 18-year-old suspect, who was arrested. He was known for committing terrible acts. He had already attacked 4 women, binding them with their own clothing and stabbing them with a screwdriver. In one instance, when a victim attempted to flee, he chased her in his car and tried to run her over. The location and timing of his crimes made the police suspect his involvement in Lindy's attack. However, investigations revealed he was not connected to that incident, as he was at work that day, supported by multiple colleagues. In December 1976, Lindy's family visited her grave to pay their respects. What they found left them in shock. Someone had vandalized the grave. The headstone was covered in knife marks. Pieces of it were scattered nearby, and the rest was splattered with red spray paint. The police took this incident seriously, as they believed the vandal might have also been involved in Lindy's death. The use of a knife suggested the vandal was aware of how Lindy had died, and notably, only her grave had been targeted in the entire cemetery. Since the family had kept the burial location private, it indicated that the vandal had intentionally sought it out, possibly by following family members. Unfortunately, the detectives were unable to identify the culprit. An entire year went by without any answers, leaving Lindy's family in a state of confusion and distress about what happened to her. In the following years, detectives looked into many people who were connected to Lindy's life. They examined her mother's boyfriend, looked into frequent customers of the flower shop, and even explored possible connections to serial killers active in Pennsylvania at that time. In their search for answers, they even consulted psychics. Despite these efforts, the case of Lindy Beekler's death remained unsolved. 25 years after Lindy's tragic death, the lead detective retired, leaving the Lindy case as one of the oldest unsolved cases in Lancaster County. In 2006, the investigation into Lindy's death was transferred to a special group in Pennsylvania that focused on old unsolved cases, utilizing new techniques and perspectives. However, they too were unable to make any progress. Decades after his wife's death, Philip Beekler discovered the DNA analysis techniques used to convict the perpetrator. He believed these methods could also be applied to his wife Lindy's case. In 2019, police applied these techniques to analyze DNA from the crime scene and created a composite sketch of a potential suspect based on the DNA. A computer program produced 2 portraits. One depicted how the suspect likely appeared at the time of Lindy's attack, and the other showed what the suspect might look like at age 65. While the portraits weren't exact representations, they revealed important details about the suspect, including fair skin, brown eyes, dark hair, and possible distinctive features. Despite this progress, locating the suspect was still difficult. The DNA sample was analyzed by C.C. Moore, a well-known American genetic genealogist. She discovered that the DNA found on the victim's underwear in 1975 was connected to a small town in Italy. Moore invested a lot of time identifying individuals with Italian ancestry who were living in Lancaster County at the time of Lindy's murder. She traced the migration patterns from this small Italian town to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. After ruling out over 2,000 individuals with similar genetic profiles, She was able to use public records to narrow it down to one suspect. This led her to identify the likely killer, a man named David Sinopoli. Investigators checked the name against existing databases, but found no records. This man had never been noticed by the police before, and his name was not on any suspect lists. However, while reviewing the case files, detectives learned that David lived in the same apartment complex as the Beechlers. To establish his connection to Lindy's death, they needed to obtain David's DNA. On February 11, 2022, David was at Philadelphia International Airport waiting for his flight. To pass the time, he bought coffee, not realizing that police were observing him from afar. After David finished his coffee, he threw the empty cup into a trash bin. An officer then discreetly collected the discarded cup and placed it in a plastic bag for further examination. The cup was sent to a lab for DNA analysis, which revealed a match between the DNA on the cup and the seminal fluid found on Lindy Beechler's underwear, confirming that David Sinopoli had been at the crime scene. Additionally, 2 drops of blood found on her stockings matched his DNA, providing further evidence. Initially, investigators thought the significant amount of blood at the crime scene belonged to the victim. However, they also considered the possibility that the perpetrator had injured himself and left behind traces of his blood. On July 17, 2022, around 7 a.m., police arrived at David's home, a few miles from the site where Lindy was murdered years earlier. He did not resist arrest, but his wife, who had been married to him for 36 years, was completely shocked. They had 3 children and 9 grandchildren, all of whom were unaware that they had been living with a criminal and murderer. Following the tragic murder of 19-year-old Lindy, David had lived quietly for nearly 47 years, never revealing his past and believing he would escape punishment. After David was arrested, Lindy's family had a reason to celebrate. Unfortunately, many family members never got to see justice served. Lindy's father died in 2000, and her mother followed in 2007. Her husband, Philip, was still alive and had remarried around 1990. Even though he hadn't initially planned to, he wanted to honor Lindy's hopes for him by finishing college, attending graduate school, and becoming an artist, which he accomplished. Eventually, he was able to let go of the tragedy and move forward with his life. The day after David's arrest, the police held a press conference announcing that they considered the case of Lindy Beechler's murder closed. Friends and family of David struggled to believe he was involved, thinking there must have been a misunderstanding. However, it's painful to acknowledge that this man evaded consequences for his actions for nearly 50 years, living as if nothing had happened after taking a young woman's future. Years went by, but the police never forgot about the case and continuously worked to solve it. Eventually, justice was served. David Sinopoli was taken into custody without the option for bail. Initially, he strongly denied any connection to Beechler's death, but as the trial date approached, he changed his mind and agreed to a plea deal. On October 19, 2023, 48 years after the crime, David Sinopoli pleaded guilty to third-degree murder, aggravated assault, and burglary. He received a prison sentence of 25 to 50 years. The judge mentioned that considering the defendant's age, this effectively amounted to a life sentence. David never explained why he killed Lindy by brutally stabbing her 19 times and violating her body to fulfill his selfish desires. Lindy and David were neighbors in the same apartment complex, but there is no evidence that they ever interacted prior to the crime. This leaves the true motives behind his actions a mystery, even to the police. It's possible that David was strongly attracted to her and eventually succumbed to his hidden urges. His primal instincts took over, which is why he is now in prison. A girl set out from her home to visit a friend but never arrived. Initially, the police found no clues, and the case went cold. For years, it seemed that the answer was just out of reach, and no one could solve the mystery. Decades later, everything changed when the truth emerged in an unexpected way. Claire Tiltman was born on January 14, 1977, in the small British village of Greenhithe. As an only child, she attended an all-girls school where she made many friends. From a young age, Claire was focused and determined. She aspired to be one of the first female firefighters in the country. During high school, she volunteered at charity events organized by the local fire department, offering her assistance in any way possible. However, She was also committed to earning a college degree before pursuing her dream career. In January 1993, when Claire was 16 years old, she was busy with her final exams and considering her future education. On January 18th, just 4 days after her birthday, she went to a friend's house to discuss college options and potential applications. Claire left home around 6 p.m., informing her mom that she would return in about an hour and a half. However, when that time passed, Claire still had not come back. Initially, Claire's mom suspected that she had simply lost track of time and might have stayed longer at her friend's house. However, when it was past 8 p.m., her concern grew. She called Claire's friend's house, only to learn that Claire had never arrived. Believing that plans might have changed, she began calling some of Claire's other friends, but nobody had seen her that evening. A few minutes later, Claire's mom went outside and encountered a neighbor who informed her about an incident a few miles away. The area had ambulances and numerous police cars. Feeling anxious at the time, Claire's mom went directly to the local police station to report her daughter missing. She gave them a detailed description of Claire, but instead of taking her report, the officers asked her to return home. They mentioned that there had been an incident and that someone would come by shortly to explain the situation. A short time later, police arrived at her door with devastating news that no parent ever wants to hear. Her daughter had been found dead just hours earlier. That evening, 2 men were driving along a road connecting nearby towns when they noticed a girl kneeling by the roadside. Concerned, they stopped to check on her. As they got closer, they realized something was seriously wrong. She was struggling to breathe and appeared to be unresponsive. One man quickly ran to a nearby pub to call for help while the other stayed with her. Initially, he thought she might have been hit by a car since she was so close to the road. He tried to comfort her, but her condition deteriorated rapidly. Within minutes, she stopped breathing entirely, and when paramedics arrived, it was already too late. Her body was taken to the medical examiner, and the findings were shocking. She had been stabbed 9 times, likely with a large knife, but there were no signs of abuse. Meanwhile, the police started investigating the crime scene and quickly identified where the attack had occurred. Claire was probably ambushed in a narrow alleyway off the main road leading to her friend's house. The nature of her injuries suggested that the attacker approached her from behind. However, there was little else to help the investigation. The alley was quiet, dark, and deserted. There were no security cameras, witnesses, or helpful evidence. One crucial detail stood out. The medical examiner noted the murder weapon was unusually large, too big to be carried casually in a pocket. Detectives suspected that the killer had brought the knife from home, indicating a premeditated plan to use it. News of the murder quickly spread through Claire's village and neighboring towns. That evening, some students were still at school studying for exams when they heard the news on the radio. Initially, the victim's identity was unknown, but it wasn't long before rumors circulated. With no strong leads in the investigation, the police sought help from the public. A few people came forward claiming to have seen a man in a light-colored coat near the road around 7 p.m. Another witness reported seeing a man with dark, curly hair leaving an alleyway, but neither individual could be identified, despite the tight-knit nature of the community. Detectives suspected that the attacker might have had a personal connection to Claire, which could explain the motive. However, they also considered a more alarming possibility that this incident could be part of a pattern, indicating that they might be dealing with a serial offender. In December 1988, 4 years before Claire was murdered, a 27-year-old woman was attacked by an unknown assailant while walking home from work. He was armed with a gun and a knife, abducted her, and drove to a remote area where he attempted to assault her. After stabbing her 5 times, he left her, believing she was dead. Miraculously, she survived. Despite her severe injuries and the freezing temperatures, she crawled to a nearby road, where a group of workers found her. She spent 9 days in intensive care, and doctors successfully saved her life. However, the police were never able to identify or capture her attacker. After Claire was murdered, detectives and local residents started to suspect that the same individual might be responsible for both crimes. A few days later, Claire's funeral took place. drawing hundreds of people from the community. Prior to the funeral, her parents spoke to reporters and mentioned that they feared the killer might attend the service. The detectives shared this concern, so they were present at the funeral and carefully noted everyone who attended. However, this effort still did not lead them to the person responsible for her murder. In the weeks that followed, the police continued to question local residents and investigate leads, but they did not find any useful information. Over 2 years passed, and it began to feel like the case would remain unsolved. Gradually, as people stopped discussing what happened to Claire, until one day, everything changed. On October 17, 1995, a local woman was returning home from work when a man attacked her just a few hundred yards from where Claire had been stabbed. The attacker used a knife. When the woman fell and screamed, he fled the scene. Fortunately, she survived despite her injuries. However, detectives faced challenges since the attacker approached her from behind, so she couldn't describe his face or any specific features. Luckily, a witness stepped forward and reported seeing a white Ford Capri nearby. This information allowed investigators to quickly identify the car's owner, a local milkman named Colin. Police remembered that they had previously spoken to Colin right after Claire's murder. He had called them to report seeing a man with dark hair near the crime scene. However, when detectives met with him a few weeks later, his story had changed slightly. Initially, Colin said he was driving on that road around 6:30 p.m., but now he insisted it was closer to 5:30 p.m. Nevertheless, he had an alibi. His mother told the police that they had been driving together and were already home when Claire was attacked. Detectives had more reasons to be suspicious of Colin. He drove a white Ford Capri, which witnesses had also spotted near another attack. Colin was known for wearing a light-colored trench coat, matching the description given by several witnesses from both crime scenes. He also had light-colored hair, and 2 different people reported seeing a fair-haired man near the alley where Claire was murdered. These factors led detectives to seriously consider him as a suspect and to obtain a warrant to search his home. Police discovered a large knife in the house that matched the wounds of the latest victim. However, that was just the start of their findings. They also found a hidden journal, which contained shocking revelations. In the diary, Colin confessed to attacking a woman in 1988, referring to it as his masterpiece, and claiming it had a 95% success rate. When he learned that the victim had survived, he expressed a desire to do better next time. Additionally, he mentioned an attempt to sneak into a care home to kill someone, but stated that the plan failed. Colin Ash Smith shared some unsettling experiences from his past. He revealed that he admitted to threatening his first victim, warning her that if she reported him to the police, he would harm someone else. Additionally, Colin confessed to a stabbing incident in 1995. He was angry with his girlfriend, believing she was unfaithful. In his rage, he drove around looking for someone to hurt. Initially, he saw a man but thought that would be too risky. Later, he noticed a woman walking alone, stopped his car and attacked her. Afterward, he felt a sense of relief and was indifferent about the woman's fate. The diary revealed his intentions to commit additional murders and mentioned that he had broken into the homes of several women he knew while they were away. When police examined Colin's car, they discovered blood-stained clothes and a torn piece of a tie, which he had used in an attempt to strangle his first victim. This evidence was sufficient to charge him with attacks on both women. Detectives also believed he was responsible for Claire's murder and began investigating for any possible connections. Colin's family was familiar with Claire's family. They both frequented the same community center, a social hub for residents. Remarkably, Claire had celebrated her birthday at that center just 4 days before her death, and Colin had been there the same night. Investigators also noted that Colin attended her funeral. However, despite these connections, there was no concrete evidence linking him to her murder. While Colin was in jail, detectives interrogated him, but he denied any involvement. He did present a theory, suggesting that the killer could be a man who used to play pool with Claire at the community center. Colin claimed that this man left town soon after the murder and that he last saw him at Claire's funeral. Police were able to locate the man, but he did not match any of the witness descriptions of someone seen near the crime scene. In contrast, Colin fit the descriptions perfectly. but the police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge him. Kaytlin was ultimately charged only for the two attacks that occurred in 1988 and 1995. In December 1996, he pleaded guilty and received life sentences, with the chance of parole after 15 years. However, investigators continued their pursuit of justice for Claire, seeking any evidence that could strengthen their case against him. Among all the possible suspects, Kaytlin remained the most likely, but there were significant challenges: a lack of physical evidence and his alibi. Kaytlin called the police the day after the murder, claiming he saw a man with dark hair near the scene about an hour later. However, this call contradicted his own alibi because, according to his account, he would have had to be very close to the alley when Claire was attacked. This raised suspicions among detectives. Was his mother lying to protect him? Detectives continued their investigation and eventually revealed the truth. Kaytlin's alibi was entirely fabricated. They found concrete evidence showing that his mother was not with him that evening, indicating that she had lied to protect him. In addition to this, investigators made another unsettling discovery. They learned that Kaytlin's father had disposed of a knife that Kaytlin had brought home after the 1995 attack. He confessed to boiling the knife, taking it apart, and throwing away the pieces just hours before police arrived with a search warrant. As a result, he was sentenced to 12 months in prison. Kaytlin's mother was also involved. She later gave an interview to a local TV station where she claimed it was her idea for her husband to dispose of the knife. She insisted that she believed her son was innocent and was afraid that the police would wrongfully accuse him of someone else's crime. Despite their extensive investigation, police still lacked sufficient evidence to charge Kaytlin with Claire's murder. While he served time for other attacks, detectives continued to explore his background in hopes of finding a connection to the crime, but they came up empty-handed. The only notable find occurred during a routine search of his prison cell, where officers discovered disturbing notes filled with graphic fantasies about women he knew. These notes resembled pages from his old diary and painted a troubling picture of his mindset. After that, the investigation stalled. Claire's parents believed Kaytlin was the murderer, and it weighed heavily on them that the police couldn't charge him. Sadly, Claire's mother died of cancer in 2008, and her father passed away in 2012, so neither lived to see justice for their daughter. In 2013, the case gained public attention again as detectives renewed their efforts to identify the killer. They reached out to the public for any information, and even the Prime Minister supported their appeal. Although many tips came in, none were helpful until a former cellmate of Kaytlin's, Stephen Dubois, stepped forward with new information. He claimed that Kaytlin had bragged about attacking a girl one day. According to him, Kaytlin recounted seeing her at a crosswalk and described how he suddenly lost control. Detectives quickly noticed an important detail. Claire had been using a crosswalk that led directly into the alley where she was attacked. In contrast, the other two victims had been found far from any crosswalks. This clue strongly indicated that Kaytlin might have been referring to Claire or possibly another victim that the police had not yet identified. However, detectives were skeptical about the existence of other victims since there were no similar unsolved cases reported in the area. Detectives did not have enough evidence to prove guilt yet, but they decided it was time to present all their findings and attempt to take the case to trial. Meanwhile, a new law in the UK was enacted, allowing prosecutors to introduce a suspect's previous convictions in court. This could significantly impact Claire's case. Kaytlin was already serving a sentence for two violent attacks that were strikingly similar to Claire's case and occurred only a short distance from where she was killed. Additionally, investigators had testimony from Stefan and solid evidence that Kaytlin's alibi was fabricated. With this information, prosecutors felt they had enough to proceed. On February 12, 2014, detectives announced that Kaytlin had officially been charged with Claire's murder. This was significant timing, as it coincided with his first scheduled parole hearing. Instead of being released, he remained in jail while prosecutors prepared for trial. During the proceedings, he revealed even more unsettling information. He disclosed that he began sneaking out of his house at night when he was about 19 or 20 years old, taking a knife with him and roaming the streets, looking for someone to kill. Kaytlin expressed that for him, It was about feeling powerful and having control over others. As he didn't want to appear weak, his ex-girlfriend testified that Colin started behaving unusually right after Claire was murdered. Initially, she thought he was just as shaken as everyone else in town, but later realized there was more going on. When asked about his feelings toward women, Colin admitted he both loved and hated them. He acknowledged that he struggled with low self-esteem and often felt worthless, which made it difficult for him to trust anyone, especially women. He also mentioned that he owned a collection of 20 to 30 knives at home, along with a crossbow and several air rifles, and his parents were aware of his collection. Additionally, Colin confessed that he never left the house without carrying a knife. When Stefan was called to testify, the prosecution faced an unexpected problem. Stefan stated that he could not clearly remember what Colin had said to him and acknowledged that he might have mixed up the conversation with someone else. The trial lasted 5 weeks, and on December 11, 2014, the jury found Colin guilty of murdering Claire Tiltman. He received a life sentence in prison, with a chance for parole after 21 years. When the verdict was announced, Colin showed no emotion. He later appealed the decision, but the court turned it down, stating that the evidence against him was overwhelming. After 26 long years, justice was finally served. Following his conviction, detectives branded Ash Smith absolutely evil and said he should never be released. Jaswant Narwal, chief prosecutor for CPS Southeast, called the case one of the most complex that CPS Southeast has dealt with in recent years. In November 2015, Ash Smith appealed against his conviction on the grounds that Judge Sweeney was wrong to allow seriously harmful material to be put before the jury. However, the appeal was dismissed by Judge Davis and 2 other judges of appeal. He is currently being held at HMP Durham. In honor of Claire, local officials first named a road after her, and later they renamed a street using her last name. In 2022, a new community center was opened, proudly named after Claire Tiltman. Claire Tiltman's tragic murder left an indelible mark on Greenhithe, but her legacy endures through the community's unwavering pursuit of justice and the tributes that honor her vibrant spirit. After 26 years, Colin Ash Smith's conviction brought closure to a case that once seemed unsolvable, underscoring the resilience of Kent police and the impact of new legal measures. While Claire's parents did not live to see this resolution, her memory lives on in the road, street, and community center named after her, inspiring future generations to embody her determination and kindness. The case stands as a testament to the power of perseverance, ensuring that Claire's light continues to shine brightly in the hearts of those who knew her and beyond. A young woman was on her way home after spending a night out with friends, but she never arrived. Jessica Lynn Callagher was born on May 8, 1982 in Austin, Texas, where she lived with her parents and 2 brothers. Jessica was warm, friendly, and easily made friends. Beyond her sociable nature, she was very ambitious, had a clear goal since high school. She wanted to become a teacher. To achieve this, she enrolled at Texas State University and earned her bachelor's degree in science. Jessica then decided to pursue a master's degree while working as a teaching assistant at an elementary school and taking a part-time job at a grocery store. Despite her busy schedule, she maintained a positive attitude, believing that her hard work would eventually lead to success. On September 7, 2009, Jessica had a day off. She spent it with her friends and cousin, Melanie. They began the day by lounging at the pool and went out for dinner. Afterwards, they visited a bar to play pool. At the end of the night, Jessica became the designated driver, ensuring everyone got home safely. She dropped off Melanie last, around 1:30 in the morning. Melanie invited Jessica to stay over, but Jessica declined since she had an early shift at the grocery store and needed to stop at a 24-hour shop to buy food for her dogs. After saying goodbye to her cousin, she left. A few hours later, as morning arrived, Melanie got a call from one of Jessica's co-workers. She learned that Jessica had missed her shift, which was unusual since Jessica never skipped work without a valid reason. At that time, Jessica had been promoted to store manager, adding to her responsibilities. Weren't he worried? Melanie called several friends, but none had heard from Jessica that morning. She then contacted her brother, John Ridenour, who lived with Jessica. John told Melanie he hadn't seen her either. John, a police officer, had started his shift at 5:30 a.m. and hadn't noticed if Jessica had come home during the night. He also hadn't checked her room before leaving for work. Concerned, he quickly returned home. But Jessica was still missing. It seemed she hadn't been home at all, as her dogs were acting unusually, almost as if they hadn't been fed in a while. This raised alarm bells. Something was definitely wrong. John quickly contacted his colleagues at the police department to track Jessica's phone. The signal led them to a restaurant near her home. Melanie and her boyfriend hurried to the restaurant and soon found Jessica's car in the parking lot. However, when they approached and opened the door, they were horrified to see that Jessica was slumped in the driver's seat, unresponsive. Her skin was badly sunburned, and the inside of the car was extremely hot. Melanie's boyfriend immediately called the police, who sent officers and an ambulance to the scene. Paramedics confirmed that Jessica was dead, and her body was taken for further investigation. It was evident that she had likely been attacked. Investigators started looking into Jessica's car. They quickly noticed that the driver's seat was pushed too far back. Given the injuries she had, detectives believed she might have been attacked while still in the car. They also found that her keys, wallet, and credit cards were missing. On the back seat, there was a bag of dog food, indicating that Jessica had been in the car since the night before, as she intended to go to the store right after dropping off her cousin. After searching the car thoroughly, detectives entered the restaurant near the parking lot where Jessica's car was found. This is when the investigation took an unexpected twist. One of the restaurant employees informed the investigators that when she arrived for work early that morning, she saw Jessica's car and noticed that Jessica was still alive at that time. The witness reported that Jessica was sitting inside her car, completely undressed and behaving oddly, as if she were under the influence. Although the scene was unusual, the employee didn't dwell on it and went inside to begin her shift. Shortly after, she stepped outside again and saw Jessica sitting by her car. Jessica had put her clothes back on but was still acting strangely, just sitting there and running her hands through her hair. When the employee went outside a third time, Jessica was back in her car, talking to herself and making odd hand gestures. The police later discovered several more witnesses who had seen Jessica alive that morning. Despite her unusual behavior, no one called for help or checked on her well-being. After interviewing the witnesses, detectives returned to Melanie and asked if Jessica might have been drinking alcohol or taking banned substance. Melanie firmly stated that Jessica had been sober that night, as she was the designated driver responsible for getting everyone home safely and had worked the next day. She also claimed that Jessica had never used banned substance. The situation puzzled the investigators, but they later uncovered a possible explanation. Medical examiners discovered signs of strangulation on Jessica's body, including marks from hands and a likely rope or belt. She also had numerous bruises, scratches, and she had been abuse assaulted. Experts noted that her trauma could have resulted in a brain injury, which was worsened by the hours she spent inside a hot car in the sun. This might clarify her unusual behavior, her disorientation, and why she didn't call for help. It is likely that Jessica was so affected that she didn't understand what was happening to her, eventually leading to death. Toxicology reports confirm Melanie's earlier statement. Jessica had no alcohol or banned substance in her system. If any of the witnesses had called for medical assistance, doctors might have been able to save her, but it was now too late. Detectives needed to determine who was responsible for her death. They began by searching for CCTV footage, but unfortunately, there were no cameras in the parking lot where Jessica was found. However, they made an important discovery. If she had bought dog food late at night, it was likely that she stopped at the 24-hour Walmart across the street. The detectives obtained the store's security footage, which showed Jessica arriving, walking into the store alone, and there were no indications that anything was wrong. She went straight to the pet food aisle, picked up a large bag, and proceeded to the checkout. Everything appeared normal, but as she exited the store, detectives observed something noteworthy. Just a few seconds later, a man followed her outside. Detectives reviewed more footage and noted that the man arrived at Walmart just minutes before Jessica. He parked at the far end of the parking lot, entered the store, but instead of shopping, he went straight to the restroom and then left. When detectives checked the entrance camera, they saw him following closely behind Jessica and appearing to be in a hurry. However, there was an issue. Jessica's car was parked behind a large tree, which blocked the camera's view. Despite this, the footage allowed them to track the man's movements. He approached Jessica's car, went behind the tree, and did not emerge again. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car exited the parking lot. A surveillance camera later recorded a vehicle arriving at the restaurant parking lot where Jessica was discovered the next morning. Shortly after, an individual got out of Jessica's car and walked across the lot toward the parking area of Walmart. This individual then got into the same vehicle that a suspicious man had driven earlier. Detectives were nearly certain that this person was involved in Jessica's murder, but the quality of the surveillance footage made it difficult to identify him or his vehicle clearly. However, the detectives still had some options. With Jessica's credit cards missing, they examined her accounts for any recent transactions and discovered a lead. One of her cards had been used at a gas station approximately 20 minutes after her car was left at the restaurant. They obtained the gas station's surveillance footage and quickly recognized the red pickup truck associated with their suspect. When they checked the camera near the register, their suspicions were confirmed. It was indeed the same man. This provided proof that he had Jessica's credit card, making him appear even more guilty. The detectives then released the footage of the suspect and his vehicle to the news, seeking help from the public for any information about him. Detectives continued their search for more evidence, but found no new leads. Days went by without any significant developments until they received a call from a woman. She claimed that the man in the security footage resembled her fiancé's best friend, Crispin Harmel. She also mentioned that Crispin was expected to visit that evening to repay some money he owed, but he never arrived. After seeing the news report about Jessica's murder, she recognized him in the surveillance video. Although she was shocked to think he could be involved in such a terrible crime, she understood that she needed to inform the police. Detectives started investigating Crispin's background and soon found a significant detail. Just weeks before Jessica's murder, a patrol officer had stopped him for driving with an expired license. When the investigators examined the officer's body camera footage, they noticed that Crispin closely matched the description of their suspect. Moreover, he was wearing the same baseball cap as the person in the surveillance video. 5 days after Jessica's murder, police visited Crispin's home. They immediately noticed his pickup truck, which was the same model as the one captured on surveillance footage. However, there were some changes. The chrome details visible in the video had been painted over in black. When detectives knocked on his door, Crispin surprised them by quickly admitting that he had met Jessica that night. He explained that they connected through an adult website and arranged to meet for a casual hookup. Crispin said they met in the Walmart parking lot, where he got into Jessica's car. He claimed she drove them to a park, where they had intimate before returning to Walmart. Before parting ways, they talked in her car, during which he mentioned his financial struggles. According to him, Jessica then gave him her credit card so he could buy gas. After saying their goodbyes, they went their separate ways. The next day, after seeing news reports about Jessica's murder, Crispin panicked and feared he might be accused. He disposed of her credit card and repainted parts of his truck. Although Crispin recounted his story confidently, detectives recognized it as a lie, viewing it as a desperate attempt to evade responsibility. The surveillance footage contradicted his account. He claimed they had planned to meet in the Walmart parking lot, but he only approached Jessica after she had returned to her car. He also said she drove him back after their supposed meeting, but the footage clearly showed him walking back to his own truck alone. Jessica's car remained in the parking lot until the next morning, and no one else interacted with it. Detectives collected Crispin's phone and computer, as well as Jessica's devices, because they suspected there was no evidence of communication between them. No messages, no calls, nothing. In fact, Jessica had never visited the adult website that Crispin claimed they used to arrange their meeting. However, when investigators examined Crispin's computer, they discovered something noteworthy. just hours after the police found Jessica's body. He searched for and read several news articles about her murder. Jessica's friends and family also doubted Crispin's story. They believed she would never seek a one-night stand or meet a stranger in a parking lot at night. That behavior was simply not in her character. Additionally, she had told a friend that she needed to rest before her morning shift and still had to feed her dogs. There was no way she would have gone out for a secret late-night date. Investigators thought that Crispin was trying to shift the blame onto others. However, the overwhelming evidence against him made it difficult for him to create a credible excuse. Based on the surveillance footage, detectives reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Crispin probably saw Jessica inside Walmart and decided to target her. He followed her to her car, got in, and used threats to prevent her from crying out or resisting. It seems he then forced her to drive to a nearby park, where he abused her. Afterward, he returned to the parking lot near Walmart, closer to his own truck. Before leaving, he strangled her and took her wallet and credit cards. When the police confronted Crispin about the incident, he stopped answering questions and requested a lawyer. Despite there being strong evidence against him, investigators faced a significant challenge that could jeopardize the entire case. Jessica had survived for several hours after the attack, which posed a major legal issue. The problem was that medical experts could not definitively explain why this occurred. Cases like hers were so rare that they had not been thoroughly studied. While the official cause of death was identified as strangulation, there had never been a documented case of someone being strangled, surviving for hours, and then dying later as a direct result of the attack. The only way to solidify the case would be a confession, but Crispin refused to admit to any wrongdoing. Detectives faced a challenging situation. They believed that Crispin was guilty of Jessica's murder, as no one else could have committed the crime. However, since Jessica had survived until the morning after the attack, there was a significant concern that the case might not hold up in court. To bolster their case, investigators examined Jessica's car for more evidence, but found nothing. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no other evidence linking Crispin to the crime scene. Prosecutors discovered a temporary way to proceed. They charged Crispin with evidence tampering linked to Jessica's case. Crispin had confessed to disposing of her credit card and repainting his truck, which were obvious attempts to conceal his actions. They had his own admissions as evidence. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and received a 10-year prison sentence for evidence tampering. Detectives were committed to achieving justice for Jessica and refused to give up. They needed strong scientific evidence to link Crispin to her murder. For years, their efforts led to no significant breakthroughs. Then in 2013, they found a scientific article that changed the course of the investigation. The article discussed cases in which strangulation did not immediately cause death, but instead resulted in a condition called delayed death syndrome. This syndrome can lead to brain damage, causing victims to feel confused, disoriented, and unable to seek help. The article's findings closely aligned with Jessica's behavior following the attack and reinforced the initial medical examiner's belief that she had suffered a brain injury, leaving her unaware of her situation until it was too late. Detectives contacted the author of this article right away and began constructing a murder case against Crispin using advanced medical sciences support. In May 2014, Crispin was officially arrested for murder, but he still maintained his innocence throughout the process. During the trial, his defense attorney emphasized a critical point. There was no DNA evidence linking Crispin to the crime. The prosecution contended that Jessica had fought back during the attack and likely scratched her assailant, which should have left DNA traces under her fingernails. However, forensic experts for the prosecution highlighted an important detail. Jessica had been trapped in her car for hours in extreme heat. At such high temperatures, DNA breaks down quickly, and by the time her body was examined, any genetic material under her nails would have completely degraded and been unrecoverable. Prosecutors built their case against Crispin using strong forensic evidence and extensive surveillance footage that strongly indicated his guilt. However, a complication arose when Crispin's lawyer challenged the accuracy of the timestamps on the video evidence. Initially, the footage obtained from the security cameras did not have any timestamps. Since the timing of events was critical, prosecutors applied specialized software to add timestamps later, which gave the defense a chance to question the integrity of the evidence. Crispin's attorney contended that this was a significant issue because he had not received the original footage with the timestamps included. Ultimately, the judge ruled in favor of the defense, resulting in a mistrial. Consequently, Crispin avoided conviction due to this technicality. Nevertheless, he remained in prison, serving his 10-year sentence for evidence tampering. Prosecutors quickly started preparing for a new trial. Over the next few years, Crispin's legal team worked diligently to stop the retrial, arguing that it would violate his rights. Ultimately, however, a higher court decided in favor of the prosecution, allowing the trial to proceed. The new trial began in 2018, and this time, the prosecution meticulously addressed every aspect of the case, ensuring the defense couldn't take advantage of any loopholes. They successfully convinced the jury of Crispin's guilt, resulting in his conviction for murder. Crispin Harmel received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors opted not to seek the death penalty, believing it might jeopardize their chances of a guilty verdict. They were aware that the delayed death syndrome argument could create doubts for the jurors, and in death penalty cases, a conviction requires complete certainty. A few years later, Crispin attempted to appeal his sentence, but his request was turned down. Consequently, he is still in prison with very little chance of being released. Jessica's family expressed gratitude to the investigators and prosecutors for their unwavering commitment to seeking justice, even though it took 9 years to achieve a verdict. However, they also shared that they had hoped the sentencing would provide them with some relief and closure. But ultimately, no punishment for Crispin could ever really alleviate their suffering.
In 1995, 11-year-old Lacey Phillips lived with her mother, Mary, her father, James, and her older siblings. Brother Jesse, who was 15 at the time, and sister Darla, who was 17. The family was very close-knit and had a strong bond. The Phillips family lived in their own home in a small town called Bald Knob, Arkansas, which they had moved to 5 years earlier from Hope, Arkansas. They considered Bald Knob an ideal place for family life and raising children. Mary was known as a loving mother and wife, fond of gardening, outdoor recreation. The Phillips family was a typical American family, slowly building their happiness, unaware of how cruelly it would eventually be destroyed. On June 6, 1995, 11-year-old Lacey was under the supervision of her older sister, Darla. Both were students, but summer vacation had begun. Their mothers go to work during this time, and often the children will stay at home waiting for their parents to return. However, at 4 p.m. that day, Lacey had an appointment with the dentist, which coincided with Mary's end of her work shift. Consequently, Darla drove Lacey to the workplace, where their mother worked as an accountant in an automated tax and accounting service. It was planned that Lacey would wait until her mother finished work and then go to the appointment together. Darla later described this outing as completely ordinary. She talked with Mary for a while, and then Darla went home, planning to meet her friends later. She and her mother said goodbye and hugged, unaware that this would be their last meeting. Although Mary and Lacey were expected to be a little late coming back from the dentist, it was merely a routine checkup that wasn't supposed to take long. Meanwhile, Jesse and Darla were left alone at home. Their father was on a business trip 500 kilometers away. The siblings expected their mother and Lacey to return by 5 p.m., but as much more time passed with no sign of mother, they began to worry. At around 6 p.m., both teenagers grew increasingly worried as neither returned from the dentist's office. Lacey is too young to have her own plans, and Mary had no other plans for the evening. Even if something had changed, Mary always called the children to inform them if she would be late. Her uncharacteristic absence without warning heightened their concern. Darla assumed her mother might be late at work, so she called the office but received no answer. Concerned, she then headed to the dental clinic, but there was no sign of Mary or Lacey. Time passed, and as the sun began to set, Darla contacted their father to share their growing worries. He suggested they leave the house and look around the area, considering that Mary's car might have broken down or she might need help. Jesse and Darla searched the vicinity but found nothing. They returned to their house and reported their findings to their father, prompting him to contact the police. A dispatch officer spoke to James to gather necessary information. He provided details about where Mary worked, the car she drove, and their trip to the dentist set for around 4 p.m. The most alarming fact was that Mary and Lacey never reached the dentist. Law enforcement took James's report seriously, confirming that no one had arrived at the dental office. Around midnight, an officer was dispatched to check Mary's workplace. Upon arrival at the parking lot in front of the building, the patrolman noticed a pickup truck parked alone. After checking the license plate, he confirmed it was indeed Mary Phillips' vehicle. This discovery intensified fears that something had gone terribly wrong. The car was intact and locked, so the officer decided to check the office where Mary worked. He knocked on the door, which surprisingly opened because it was unlocked. Upon entering, he found the lights were off and had to use a flashlight to explore. It was then that he discovered something horrifying: the body of a woman covered in blood, with her hands tightly bound behind her back. A cord from a household appliance was wrapped around her neck, and her clothes were pulled down. The officer immediately realized she had been brutally beaten. A pulse check indicated she was dead. The body was cold, suggesting she had been killed hours earlier. The office resembled the aftermath of a violent struggle, with blood scattered around, intensifying concerns that the perpetrator might still be present. The patrolman called for reinforcements and continued to carefully inspect the rooms while waiting for his colleagues to arrive. He checked the office and then moved to the utility rooms, where he noticed a trail of blood leading to another door, which was also unlocked. He entered without any problems and saw a gruesome scene. In the middle of the room was a chair to which a girl was tied, also covered in blood. There was especially a lot of blood. Her face showed clear signs of having received several blows to the head. Thought the girl was dead, he managed to take several pictures of the second victim when she suddenly woke up, opened her eyes, and looked in his direction. Later, the police officer recalled this moment as one of the most terrible and unexpected in his life, as if he had seen a dead person returning to life. The patrolman immediately turned to his colleagues and, in addition to requesting reinforcements, asked them to call for doctors. He freed the girl and tried to provide first aid, but it quickly became obvious that she was in serious condition and that only doctors could fully help her. Despite her injuries, she was conscious and could speak. She clearly stated that her name was Lacey Phillips. The only thing that worried her was her mother's condition. She asked several times what had happened to Mary and if everything was okay with her, but the policeman distracted her from these troubling thoughts, not telling her the truth. The medics arrived a few minutes later, and Lacey was urgently taken to the nearest medical facility. On the way, she regained consciousness and then lost it again. Lacey had sustained a serious head injury from several strong blows to the head with a blunt object. Additionally, marks were found on her neck indicating strangulation, and in addition to sustaining a fracture in her cranial vault, she had a broken jaw. Mary's husband, James, was notified that something had happened to his loved ones but was given no details. He immediately packed his things and left for the city to see his daughter in the hospital to support her. He was shocked and did not understand what had happened to his family. Now, the doctors did not dare to provide a prognosis on whether the Phillips' youngest daughter, Lacey, would survive. An even greater blow was the death of 34-year-old Mary. She could not be saved and had died before the patrolman arrived. Forensic experts worked at the crime scene but were unable to find any clues that would lead to the criminal. Their only hope was Lacey, who had miraculously survived the attack, and they awaited news from the medical center with excitement. A few hours later, doctors managed to stabilize Lacey's condition. The morning after the attack, on June 7th, she woke up in hospital. She was in the intensive care unit, and they were finally able to communicate. Despite her traumatic brain injury, she remembered perfectly what had happened. Later, Lacey admitted that all of it was captured in her memory. Lacey began to recount the frightening details of how her older sister had taken her to their mother's workplace at about 3 p.m. She remained in the office until 3:45 p.m., as both of them were getting ready to go to the dentist's office for a routine checkup. The workday was almost over. But a few minutes before it ended, an unfamiliar man entered the office. He immediately headed to the desk where Mary worked. She and Mary looked at him and even stepped back. There was something frightening in his gaze, but they thought he was just a client who had come into the office. When the stranger raised his hands, it became obvious that he was not there for advice. He was wearing latex gloves. In one hand, he held a roll of wire, and in the other, a gun with which he threatened Mary and Lacey. The man announced that it was a robbery. Mary tried to cover herself and protect her daughter, but he pushed Mary's aside, knocked her to the floor, and began tying her wrists behind her back with the wire. Lacey was confused, scared, and unable to react. Everything happened too quickly. After tying up Mary, the unknown man shouted at Lacey and ordered her to follow him into another room. He brought a chair from Mary's office, placed it in the middle of the room, and forced she to sit on it while he tied her hands to the chair behind her back. She cried, begged him not to harm her and her mother. The criminal said he would not harm Mary but would hurt her daughter. After securing Lacey to the chair with wire, he immediately hit her hard on the head with the handle of the pistol. Her eyes went dark, and she lost consciousness. After which, the stranger left the room, closing the door behind him. Lacey was left alone. She was tightly tied up and couldn't even move. She felt like she was bleeding from her head. Lacey regained consciousness a few minutes later, looked around, and saw that blood was all around the chair. She was in pain, but she couldn't imagine the extent of the head injury she had sustained. She began to scream and call for help, hoping that her mother would enter the room and untie her. The door swung open, and to her horror, it was the same man again. He was furious that she was still alive and screamed, striking she again before grabbing her by the neck and beginning to strangle her until she lost consciousness once more. This lasted for several minutes. Perhaps the criminal was afraid of being caught, so he wanted to escape from the building as quickly as possible. He believed he had killed Lacey, turned off the light, and left the room. The criminal immediately fled the office. Several hours passed. Lacey came to her senses but then lost consciousness again. Each time she regained consciousness, she tried to get free and called for her mother but received no response. Her hands were tightly bound with metal wire. Lacey grew weaker with every minute. The only hope for salvation was the thought that someone would find them. About 8 hours passed during which Lacey remained locked in the dark room, bleeding. She was half asleep, could barely move, and had lost all strength. Suddenly, the girl heard a faint clicking sound coming from the next room. At first, she was scared that it was the attacker, but then the sounds were repeated next to her, and flashes appeared in her half-asleep state. Lacey realized it looked like a photo shoot. She confirmed it when she opened her eyes and saw someone taking her picture. Fortunately, it was not the criminal. It was a policeman who had arrived at the office to check on Lacey. Lacey remembered how the ambulance had arrived, how the policeman freed her. She was losing and regaining consciousness on the way to the intensive care unit of the nearest children's hospital. All this time, the doctors talked to her to keep her conscious. At each moment of clarity, Lacey tried to find out what had happened to her mother, but she never received an answer to any of her questions. Even now, while talking to the police, she still did not know that Mary was dead. After the police visit to the hospital, her father, brother, and sister came into the ward. They brought balloons and soft toys. Lacey still believed that her mother, like her, was in the hospital and had probably also suffered at the hands of the attacker but was still alive. The whole day of June 7th, Lacey's relatives spent with she, but they never answered any of her questions about Mary. She saw how, with each passing moment, her father's eyes filled with tears. Doubt began to creep in, but at that time, Lacey was still too weak and simply pushed away the bad thoughts. In the evening, James gathered his strength, went up to his daughter, knelt down, and hugged her. In a trembling voice, he told her that Mary was now in heaven with her great-grandmother. The detective leading the investigation could not afford to be sentimental, as the criminal responsible for the attack was still on the loose and might strike again. The local residents were in danger, and the bloodthirsty killer had to be stopped urgently. When Lacey found out about this, she realized with horror that she was the only chance for the police to catch the criminal. She also understood that she was in great danger and that the attacker might return to eliminate her as an unwanted witness. In the office where he committed the murder and attempted murder, the stranger left no traces. He managed to avoid leaving evidence by using latex gloves, which Lacey reported. However, he left biological fluids after abusing Mary, but their examination would take time, and the research capabilities of that era were much more modest. Therefore, the results only allowed the police to limit the circle of suspects, which at that point was not substantial. The criminal was likely an experienced killer. He knew how to avoid being caught, acted covertly, and used gloves. However, the police still had the main source of information, Lacey. She remembered the attacker perfectly and provided a very detailed description, including the smallest details of his clothing, appearance. Having learned that this man had taken her mother away from her, she was determined to bring him to justice. Describing the face of the criminal, Lacey suddenly recalled one important detail. Before he struck her on the head, while he had tied her hands with metal wire, she noticed a teardrop tattoo on his face, as well as a tattoo on his arm. This detail allowed the detectives to match these distinctive features with registered criminals. Detectives quickly identified a 31-year-old man named Jack Jones, who had the tattoos described by Lacey. Jack was well known to the local police for multiple robbery charges, but investigators did not suspect that he was responsible for much more serious crimes. The police quickly discovered Jack Jones's last known residence and went to apprehend him, expecting that he might already be on the run. To their surprise, Jack personally opened the door, did not seem alarmed at all. He was immediately brought to the station for questioning. While being taken to the department, detectives contemplated what tactics to employ to get the criminal to talk. To their surprise, no tricks were needed. As soon as Jack was asked about Mary and Lacey, he calmly began to recount what had happened. He stated that he had seen Mary standing in her office early that same day while he was driving past. As soon as it happened, he decided that he wanted to kill her because he found her incredibly beautiful. He returned later, knowing that the office closed around 4 p.m., when there should have been no one there. However, he saw a girl there but did not retreat. He tied up Lacey in the room because he was not interested in her. His goal from the very beginning was Mary. He bound her hands behind her back, placed her on the floor, abused her, and then cut a cord from the kettle, wrapped it around her neck, and began to strangle her. According to Jack Jones, this murder was an act of revenge for the abuse of his wife, as her attacker remained unpunished. The investigation revealed that Jack's wife did report the crime to the police, but later she retracted her statement against the abuser, leading to his release. Jack insisted that his wife was indeed abused, but why Mary had to pay for it remained a mystery. On the evening of June 7, 1995, Jack Jones was arrested for the abuse and murder of Mary. He was also charged with the attempted murder of Lacey. When the Phillips family was informed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, as no one could be sure that the killer wouldn't come back to eliminate the only witness. However, their fight was just beginning, as Jack still had to be brought to justice in court. Thanks to his confession, there should not be any problems. Lacey did not want to attend the hearings to avoid further trauma, but the existing evidence against him was enough to send him to prison. The trial began in April of 1996. By that time, law enforcement officials had carefully reviewed all the evidence against Jack. It was decided to show in court a recording of Lacey's account, made on a dictaphone while she was recovering from her injuries in the hospital. She quickly recovered physically, but psychologically she was broken. However, even in such a state, she wanted justice. The defense attorney tried to refute her statement, but the jury did not believe him. The defendant himself pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming that he was not himself during the attack on the mother and daughter because he was treating his bipolar disorder with illegal drugs. His arguments about a difficult childhood were also unconvincing. Ultimately, the jury found Jack Jones guilty on all counts. For the murder of Mary Phillips, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. For the brutal beating of Lacey, he received a life sentence along with an additional 30 years and a fine of $15,000 for the attempted murder of Lacey. But this was not the end of Jack's criminal story. While on death row, he confessed to another murder, that of 32-year-old Lori Barrett. This incident occurred during her 5-day vacation in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where she planned to visit friends. Because she arrived late, she didn't want to bother her friend's family and decided to stay at a hotel instead. That evening, Barrett went to a local bar to relax after her trip. There, she met a young man with several tattoos. According to several witnesses who spoke to the police, Barrett was seen drinking with the stranger until about 2 a.m. in the hotel patio. After that, they went up in the elevator together, presumably to her room. The next day, she failed to show up for a planned barbecue with her friend. Later, a cleaning lady went to her room and found her body, which had been abused and strangled. Jack Jones confessed to this murder in 2005, claiming that he liked Barrett right away, and they spent the whole evening together before going up to her room. However, the details of what happened next and the reason for the attack remain unknown, as Jack refused to disclose them. For the trial related to this case, he was extradited to Florida and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, after which he was returned to Arkansas to await execution. Interestingly, Jack Jones could have been caught and convicted of this crime while it was still being committed. A composite sketch was created based on witness statements and footage from the hotel's security cameras. His sister identified him after seeing the sketch in a newspaper and showed it to their father, who insisted that she never talk about the event or show Jack's image to anyone else. She complied, remaining silent. Jack's father then put him on a bus and sent him to Arkansas to prevent anyone from recognizing him based on the composite sketch. Unfortunately, it cost Mary Phillips her life. When Jack's family was questioned about the story, they admitted that they knew their son had met with Barrett before the attack but did not believe that Jack could be involved in such a brutal crime. Consequently, the father decided not to contact the police. They described Jack as a very complex person who grew increasingly gloomy and cruel with age, taking out his anger not only on his siblings but also on his parents. However, they justified his behavior until the last moment, believing he could be loving and gentle. They did not think he was capable of murder. On April 24, 2017, 52-year-old Jack Jones was executed for the murder of Mary Phillips at the Cummins unit, along with abuser-murderer Marcel Williams, marking the first double execution in the country in 17 years. Jones and Williams were 2 of 4 inmates executed in Arkansas in April 2017, the other 2 being convicted murderers Liddell Lee and Kenneth Williams. Jones's last meal consisted of fried chicken, fries with tartar sauce, beef jerky, 3 candy bars, a chocolate milkshake, and juice. Lacey, now grown, was present at the execution. When Jack was given his last words, he turned to the victim's daughter, tenderly called her by name, and claimed that he had perceived her as his daughter all his life. Naturally, this only caused her disgust and anger. After the execution, it was revealed that Jack Jones was involved in another murder. Just before his execution, he gave his sister a letter he had written in 2006, with instructions to open it a year after his execution. She respected his request. When she finally opened the letter from her brother, she read a terrible confession. On May 2, 1983, 20-year-old Regina Harrison left her house in the evening to ride her bike. At that time, 19-year-old Jack Jones was riding his bike towards the beach. He meets Regina, who catches his eye, and secretly follows her to a deserted street, where he attacks, abuses, and kills her. They began to search for her that same evening after Regina did not return home at the appointed time. The next day, her body was found in a nearby park with signs of abuse and strangulation, which became the cause of death. During the investigation of this crime, detectives found a witness who identified the criminal as Ronald Stewart, who was passing by the park at the approximate time of the murder. In January of 1985, Ronald pleaded guilty and was then sentenced to 50 years in prison. He died behind bars of cancer in 2008. It later turned out that the only reason an innocent man took the blame was that Ronald Stewart had already committed a series of abuses of other girls. He had been convicted of those crimes and was now afraid of the death penalty, so he made a deal with the prosecution and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Ronald never denied his guilt during his lifetime, but DNA testing later showed that he was not guilty of Regina's murder. After Jack Jones' sister, Lynn, went to the police and handed over the letter confessing to the murder, DNA testing was conducted, and in February 2019, his words were officially confirmed: Jack was behind Regina's murder. Before the execution, he lost one of his legs due to diabetes. He stated that he was ready to die, and it remains unknown why he confessed to the murders of Mary and Barrett but did not do the same regarding Regina Harrison until he only mentioned it in a letter to his sister. After the execution, it became official that Jack had killed at least 3 young women. Law enforcement officials now believe that he could have been involved in more brutal crimes. Mary's widower, after Jack's death, spoke out against people who expressed support for the criminal. There were supporters of the killer who believed that he deserved a lighter sentence and demanded that the execution be cancelled. However, James said that he did not believe they would have maintained such a loyal attitude towards the criminal if he had killed their loved ones. Lacey, after talking to journalists, said that she could finally move on with her life. Justice had finally prevailed, and this dangerous criminal would no longer be able to harm anyone. However, even despite the execution, she believed that she would never be able to completely free herself from the consequences of the horror she had endured.